What is up? We are live. Lone Chemist Podcast, episode 27, I believe. My name is Johnny. I'm the Lone Chemist, and the people wanted it. People have been begging and pleading and crying and on their knees and just getting to have Abdallah back on the show. And here he is. Abdallah, the number one collaborator, friend, confidant. How we doing?
We're doing good, man. Thanks for having me. Always saving the best content for me. So
Exactly, man. Dude,
I give you some space. You'll be making friends on YouTube, getting after these big people and whatnot.
yeah, no,
But you know better. You know that you know to come back to the main source for the best content.
I always come crawling back, man. I always do. All right, so this is it's just kind of weird, man. So almost a year to the day, like we recorded our first podcast together, and like the channel was basically launched, obviously a couple months before that. But yeah, we did the
First video was the Infinity War review. Absolutely.
Yeah, like that was our first podcast, and yeah, it's pretty sentimental to actually have some finality to what we started about a year ago. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah. So happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
I hope you have something special planned for the occasion.
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna do some lingerie and some chocolates, but I decided to be a little more loquacious. But anyway, man. Before we get into the topic of discussion, what's new with you? How's everything been going? You're in Indianapolis, obviously. You're at your beautiful apartment with some very small artwork on the walls. Yeah, there you go. Nice. Yeah. You have two little square portraits. Nice.
I wish I could say I made them myself, but
I was gonna say, yeah, they look pretty cool.
Maybe in the future. I'll first start with the writing, sort of artistic medium.
Yeah.
So writing, hopefully some type of script, whether it is a movie script, theater, or whatever. I used to do poetry. I've done that. I've done some type of music, but maybe the next thing is theater. I don't know. We'll see.
Really? Interesting. I knew you did some kind of poetry competition when you were a little bit younger, but yeah, man, keep writing, dude. You're definitely pretty eloquent, and your fucking comment on my Thanos video got 20,000 likes or some shit when you were going into the character of Thanos. Yeah.
Going into character is what I do, and I will say that the Russo brothers taught me how to do that. So
yeah,
I think I do have to give him credit when he's due.
For sure. Yeah, you should. Yeah, for sure. You should write a script or something like that. Send it to them. See if they make it. Get a Moon Knight script or something like that. Some super obscure hero or something like that. That'd be pretty sweet.
Maybe. Well, Moon Knight is probably a little bit too dark for me, but we'll see. Actually, I think that would be right in my ballpark. We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I've been wanting to write a little bit too because I've been doing the video essays, grind, and all that kind of stuff. Maybe you should talk to Alex from High Top. Maybe he's writing a lot of fan scripts right now for some stuff he wants to do. You should,
One thing I do know, I don't think that's what you said is very far-fetched, because I know certain directors, if they have websites, sometimes they'll have some type of forum where publicly you can log into the website, you can submit some type of script, they'll look at it. If they like it enough, maybe they'll option it for either somebody else to rewrite it or for you to write it yourself as a movie maker. We'll see. Because I know, what's his name? Jordan Peele. I know Jordan Peele used to have a website where he would have that link open.
Yeah.
Last time I checked, it wasn't live anymore, but it is possible for any aspiring writer, maybe watching this video or whatever. If you have a good idea, a good script, by all means, feel free to find some type of avenue to send it to these directors, and they'll definitely take a look at it. And if they like it enough, maybe you can be the next Marcus and McFeely.
Yeah, exactly. That's it's an inspiring time we live in because people, obviously the technology and just the sheer second to second communication basis we have, it's able to allow people to really follow their dreams and those kind of sentiments that we really didn't really have a couple years ago. So people, for example, this little camera that I have, I just got an Osmo Pocket. It's beautiful. It's amazing. And that allows me to expand my creativity to other things other than just editing in front of a computer for my video essays and stuff. But same thing with writing, and also you can write something and there's a decent chance that someone who actually is desperate for communication with fans will read it, which is really exciting because we're able to express ourselves in a very comprehensive way these days. It's pretty exciting. So Yeah, dude, write some stuff, man. Like let's get
Well,
you
the other thing that could be encouraging for anybody is I think Hollywood is moving in the direction where they want to see sort of underrepresented, undertold stories.
Mhm.
So if you have anything to contribute to, either people of color, stories about people of color, stories about members of the LGBT community, stories about Asian Americans, Native Americans, all types of immigrants. All of these things are stories that have historically not been really done in Hollywood, but a lot of movie makers and whatnot, studios are leaning towards being able to incorporate them more and more. So you never know.
Yeah, you don't. Yeah, it's a pretty exciting time.
2018 was a good year for that. I think. I hope it just the momentum keeps building up for 2019, where you have movies in the same sort of historical and cultural significance as like a Black Panther and Crazy Rich Asians. Those types of stories.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, man, let's get into it, man. So, I have seen Avengers Endgame twice. Abdallah has saw it yesterday, I believe.
Yep, yesterday morning.
And god damn, this was a ride, man.
Still recovering from it.
All right, so let's just get the skivvies out by just talking about the movie. It's an absolutely superb achievement that Marvel has done here. I mean, the fact that they not only pulled off all of these movies in succession with one another, they pulled off two movies back to back that were filmed back to back that were sweeping, comprehensive narratives that were dependent on so many other factors other than the movie that actually they're the story they're actually telling in that movie. They they made a film that not only served its own purpose, but it also motivated and elevated almost every other movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Like, and we were talking before the podcast, there are moments in this where legitimately it adds a layer of professionalism and continuity that wasn't there before Endgame. And they took a big risk. The time travel element of stories, even though it's being more accepted now, it comes with so many drawbacks, and the movie just gracefully just flows through them so beautifully. It's honestly like it really, even if people don't like the movie, I imagine that people will see the movie and be like, wow, like the fact that they were able to do this is pretty astounding. And that's not even speaking to the quality of the film. The movie is fantastic, but just like the overall perception of this movie is just like, if you take a step back and look at it from a bird's eye perspective, it kind of blows my mind that something like this actually exists, and it exists in a way where it's actually superb. It's a great piece of filmmaking. It really is.
When they started, the Russo brothers were very ambitious about what they could accomplish. And actually, it's funny because when Infinity War was being marketed, they said it was the singly most ambitious crossover project in the history of whatever. And obviously, it took on some memes and took on its own reality on Twitter, where everybody was posting images or macros about other crossovers. But really, you have to understand, you have to appreciate the sheer magnitude of the project itself, the challenge that they posed to themselves to be able to connect at that time 10 years of movies, all of these characters, and up to 70 unique characters that were not secondary players, so all of them have to be sort of addressed in some way. And you have those stakes. You have, obviously, they're going to be involved in some type of action, so that action will have to cost a lot of money to make. Do you have the artistic talent of your it's CGI people to be able to pull that off? Can you pull off that CGI spectacle with the appropriate amount of character-based storytelling so that it actually makes sense, so that the people are drawn within what they're seeing in the moment of? All of these challenges are things that they posed themselves, and they were able to pull it off. So, like you said, the movies were extremely well received, and it's one of those things where, me being somebody, us being some people born in the 1990s, where we were about several years removed from Star Wars. you see Star Wars as a sort of a benchmark for movie making. A lot of directors working today will say Star Wars was the inspiration that I had to do what I do. I really hope that 20 years from now, people will look into what the MCU has achieved in the last 10 years as sort of the inspiration to inspire them to become movie makers, and
100%.
give them the sort of courage to even undertake an, storytelling so massive. It can be done, and the Russo brothers have shown the pathway to do that.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, this is unprecedented. It really is. And like I said, even if people don't like superhero films, even if people don't like the MCU, even if people hate like the whole sweeping narrative aspect of this, you can't deny that this is one of the most ambitious, most unprecedentedly connected, and most comprehensive things ever put on film. Like, it really, really is. It's yeah, it's just a really beautiful achievement. Like, and we haven't even gotten to the specifics of the actual payoffs in the story. So, I mean, the fact that we're glowing about this movie just from a logistical point of view is just pretty absurd, to be honest. I think we just start talking about it, man. Let's
Just before we
yeah.
start, we don't have to worry about whether people connected. The box office speaks for itself.
Oh
The
yeah,
result came in a couple hours ago. Apparently, it made 350 million in its opening weekend.
yeah.
To put that in context, the previous record was Infinity War with I think 258. So it was like 40% higher than the previous record set by Infinity War. And that's the type of numbers so that's just the domestic numbers. Internationally, globally, is 1.2 billion.
That's
So
nuts.
in
In
one
one
weekend,
weekend.
the movie has made probably more money than every single movie except for like 10. So it just is astounding, and it's the type of thing where you not only do you marry an absurd amount of hype with a nostalgia factor where you're wrapping up all of these movies, but you're also hyping up this one because you know what it takes, you know what's involved, and it's that combination that is probably never going to be. You probably won't have such a favorable combination of factors coming into a movie opening. The last thing before this was Star Wars: The Force Awakens, where you have the instance of having a new Star Wars story, which people had been craving. It was the first Star Wars in 10 years.
Yeah.
You know that the original characters were coming back, so that was the first time coming back in a Star Wars movie in almost 40 years. All of those factors combined to make Force Awakens what it was. But
Yeah.
here you even surpass those expectations.
Exactly.
So I don't think, except maybe outside of some of the sequels of Avatar, you may not have the opportunity to ever get these kind of numbers again. So we have to appreciate in the moment
No,
what we have right here.
yeah, exactly. And well, a couple of responses to that. Number one, I think it could be possible to do it again, but it will probably be Marvel. Like, it's like there's not really any other movie making entity that will do something like this. And I agree that, like, it's unprecedented to have like the seeds planted for Thanos and the seeds planted for the actual conflicts of this movie and the ultimate resolutions so far in advance. The only way we're going to see something like this again is if like they undertake another massive saga, which is sad because, like, as we allude to in this chat, spoiler alert, a lot of characters that have been kind of the heart and soul of these movies are gone. And so to have a narrative, take place after these characters are either gone or like alternate versions, which seems kind of cheap. It's like, where do you go from here? Where do you take your storytelling medium where it's not going to feel tired or just kind of contrived? It's really I'm excited as a Marvel fan to see what they do after this, but I'm also kind of nervous because, like, there may never be. And let me be clear: if this was the end of the MCU as a whole, I will be okay with it because, like, this is such a satisfying ending in every single way that it's okay. It would be okay if this ended like this and like Marvel stopped making movies like this. But now they're, of course, they're one of the most profitable, filmmaking companies in the world. Of course, they're going to keep making movies, but I want them to be able to tell really, really, exciting stories like this one, which, I mean, we'll probably talk about this, but like some of the recent movies have been a little bit, not as great as I wanted them to be honest, but, yeah.
To piggyback on a comment you made earlier about, well, actually, we'll get to it. You didn't make it on this particular video just yet, so we'll get to it when we get to it. But
Yeah.
I think it goes back to the Russo brothers, the way they understand how to do these things, and they pull it off. If every single Marvel movie had been directed by them, you have these issues to say about it. Perhaps we'll see.
Yeah. Well, for sure.
I mean, I can see what you're thinking about, but yeah.
But also, one of the only gripes that I have with this movie actually deals with a plot point that they themselves like created. So, but again, we'll get that in a little bit. So let's kind of set the stage for this movie in context of Infinity War. So again, I mean, if you're watching this, you're probably aware of what happens in Infinity War, and if you're not, then sorry. But so the end of Infinity War, obviously Thanos gets the entire decked out gauntlet, snaps his fingers, and destroys half of all life in the universe. And basically the Avengers are completely defeated by their own experiences. The only people that are alive are two members of the Guardians of the Galaxy and the original Avengers, the original six. Which first of all, I just love that. The fact that the writers of the foresight to be the six Avengers coming back together for one last final hurrah as a team before they either go their separate ways or they perish, which I thought that was a really brilliant setup for this movie. And so focusing on the villain a little bit, obviously I did my Thanos video essay. The way they ended that movie I thought was really, really brave. Infinity War, obviously we know that heroes beat the villains at the end of the day, but the fact that Marvel themselves earned the right to have a really eerily beautiful cliffhanger like that, where Thanos is looking on the sunset of his world, he's really proud of himself, and he's like, "I've done my work," and he almost kind of sort of smiles, little pretentious grin. That was a really amazing way to end that movie because it leaves the audience I have no idea what they're going to do from here. So yeah, the setup from Infinity War to this was pretty genius, to be honest.
And you were able to see exactly because we had no idea what they were going to do. That's what fueled the hype. Is you had all these people come up with all of their theories about what is the only how can you basically it's kind of like a scavenger hunt.
Yeah.
And your source of the scavenger hunt is the previous 20 movies or whatever. I think at that time it was 18. The previous 18 MCU movies. What clues have they left behind for us to latch on to say this is how they're going to do it? This is how this will help them defeat Thanos. You know, uh, Ant-Man was establishing this whole quantum realm. Doctor Strange, you had this whole parallel universes, and that the magicians, the sorcerers can access. We knew what the characters, the ones who survived, we knew what they were about because we had followed them across the span of several movies.
Yeah.
But then we literally had no idea how they can thrive. All we knew was that there was a chance. Doctor Strange saw 14,605 different examples of the eventuality there was one in which they could win. What is that one? What does it take? All of those details people were agonizing over for about a year. And unless you were very, very clear about not getting any type of spoilers, you had no idea. A lot of people were able to successfully predict some type of usage of the quantum realm, but not necessarily to this sort of extent.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
The only way, somebody like me, for example, I knew they were going back to New York because we saw some set photos where all of these actors had their costumes from back then. And the thing is, how costumes change across movies, so okay, these costumes, the way the length of Thor's hair, the costume Captain America was making, that is from that movie, so they have to go to that time. Yeah. Those are the only ways you can sort of think of how things could have gone. But because you couldn't figure it out, you had to watch the movie to get that answer, and I think that just helped build the hype.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember on I think episode maybe 12 or 13, back in October, we talked a little bit about how I had a theory basically it was going to operate on two fronts, where Iron Man and Ant-Man would be the ones to go back and forth through time to get all the stones and everything, and then people would obviously with Captain Marvel around, like they would like go and fight Thanos like as like an army or something like that. This one was a lot more satisfying than I even could have predicted it would be. Like the fact that it's literally it's the team going together to actually carry out this goal it was really exciting to watch, and it was it was absolutely thrilling. And we'll get into like the pairings for each of the Infinity Stones, where like they were the writers did a great job, or they were able to foresee the emotional payoffs that certain characters going to get certain stones would have, which it was absolutely brilliant. So let's set the stage for the beginning of the movie. So obviously, I did call this though. The first scene in the movie is with Hawkeye's parents, Hawkeye's family being vanished. That was such a eerie and beautiful way to open the movie, because like it immediately like sets the stakes, because like we didn't see at this point, Hawkeye essentially is a civilian at this point. He's under house arrest for what happened after the Sokovia Accords kind of, imploded. And to see his entire family, the only thing he genuinely cares about in the world, I mean, we spent 18 minutes of them uninterrupted in Age of Ultron. To see him watch his family just, vanish for no reason. And keep in mind, he has no idea about Thanos. He has no idea that any of this stuff is happening simultaneous to him with his family. So the fact that just vanishes in front of him through his fingertips. That was a really haunting way to open the movie for sure.
And I think it was very important to do that because Clint was the only one we didn't see in Infinity War in terms of how he experiences what Thanos did in real time without having any idea about what's happening, and then especially how he reacts from it. And I think it was very important, and it was very risky for the Russo brothers to think about having a 3-hour movie where basically the first hour is spent dealing with the consequences of what Thanos did. And I think because that's how you ended the last movie, you can't just start a movie by having sort of a plan already in motion.
Yeah.
Your characters are broken. You've defeated them. It's not about just defeating them militarily, which Thanos technically did, even though you can say Wakanda's army beat his army. But Thanos himself beat the Avengers. They could not stop him.
Yeah.
So they failed in that regard. You have to spend some time dealing with how all of these characters and the universe at large deals with this failure.
Which I thought was a brilliant way to do it. Like, they have Captain America, he's the spiritual leader of the Avengers, and he actually attends a support group for people that like are like reeling from this terrible thing. I mean, they coin it as the vanishing in the movie. Like when Ant-Man goes to the monuments, for example, like, this is something that it didn't just happen to the Avengers in a vacuum. It happened universe wide, like the entire world essentially. Like, you ever watch The Leftovers by any chance? That show on HBO?
I'm familiar with the show, but I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, basically 2% of the population vanishes, like in a very similar way to what happened in Infinity War. In this case, 50% of humanity and the world at large vanishes. Like, it was it was smart to dive into, the actual social, economic, and really just emotional turmoil that's going to put onto somebody. Like, we see abandoned car lots, we see abandoned sports stadiums, we see people absolutely defeated by this experience, and there's so much emotional mileage that they got out of that. And even though it was quick, like we see the entire world in the context of half of everybody you've known and loved is now gone, which is it was absolutely brilliant. And so one thing that I really liked about Endgame, I mean, this is kind of obvious, but they subverted expectations in a really effective way from the first 10 minutes of this movie. So, and also this touches on the marketing aspect of the movie. The marketing for this movie billed that 9-minute introduction as the entire film. Like, they showed nothing from like the second half of the movie. They showed nothing from the eventuality of time travel. They showed nothing from the actual way in which Thanos is defeated. They completely did like a really nice Houdini trick on people, where they mapped out this really infinitesimally small part of the movie as the entire plot. So obviously the Avengers meet up with Captain Marvel because Captain Marvel saves Nebula and Tony from space, and essentially while Tony is completely grieving for the loss of seeing Peter Parker vanish in front of him. The rest of the Avengers go and they get to Thanos and they pin him down. They ask where the stones are, and so he destroys the stones, and you see him as kind of a sickly old man, and he's like, "I've done my work. I was done." And then Thor chops his head off, and he went for the head.
Finally, right?
But this is like a problem that I have with the movie. Actually, we'll get into that part later. But yeah, like they completely subverted all my expectations of the movie in 9 minutes, and I legitimately thought that Thanos was going to have some kind of army backing him up. Legitimately, him as a character, he did what he wanted to do, and then he was fine with dying as a result of it. Like, he didn't try and fight back. He didn't try and do anything. He almost like let it happen to him, and that kind of shows like he was this kind of misguided zealot of a character where all that mattered to him was the goal of doing what he wanted to do, and then after that he was done. And I love the line where he said, the only reason for the stones to exist outside of my goal was temptation. And he actually has a pretty good act to do that, where he actually destroys the very thing that he knows will give him temptation. Any other villain would be like, I will rule the world and this will be, which again, this is one of the issues I have with Thanos in the movie. But the fact that like in 9 minutes they set up all of that, and it almost is like a concluding arc for Thanos as a character from Infinity War. 9 minutes of the movie just completely changed the way that you see, or at least the way you predict the movie's going to turn out. Because I literally didn't see that coming when they killed Thanos like that.
When they killed him, yes, it was very shocking. And I also very much like doing that as a storytelling, because that is the functional, that is the practical end for Thanos as a character. That is his endpoint.
Yeah.
When you think about his entire character arc. So you work your entire life basically to collect all of these stones and to do the work. You have to remember, this is the type of work he's been doing his entire life. He's been going around, taking his army to different planets, killing half of the population through warfare, and then seeing that those populations were successful, were thriving as a result of his actions. So as far as he knows, every single time he does that, it is for the greater good. And the theme of the greater good is permeates this entire movie, because you have characters who have basically no concept of employing the greater, basically putting the greater good ahead of their own self-interest. And that is a line that Howard Stark himself says during the movie.
For the greater good, yeah.
And Thanos is somebody who is the complete opposite. He always looks for what he considers to be the greater good, even at his own expense. He knows that the stones nearly killed him, but because he was so weak, you would presume that he would have an army backing him up, like you said, some type of sentry. But when they arrived on that planet and Captain Marvel did the scouting, she was like, there is no army, there are no scouts, it's just him. So he basically knew he was weak, and he was okay with that, like you said, because the work was done. He had nothing more to live for. And he no longer had any sort of temptation, so he destroyed the stones, and that was the end of his story. So I think it was very important to do that in the beginning, and then spending even more time to see what are the ramifications of what Thanos did. Yeah. And so when we go back to Earth, we have a time jump 5 years later.
Yeah.
What happens during those 5 years? Basically, everything Thanos predicted is off. He predicted that some type of all these populations would thrive. That did not happen on Earth.
Yeah.
The general society no longer knew how to function. So you no longer have sports. The Mets, they show Citi Field. There is no more baseball.
Yeah.
There is no more sort of entertainment. There is no more sources of happiness. People are grieving still to this day.
Yeah.
The Joe Russo, he plays a character in Captain America's Circle of Grief. He plays a character who's just getting back into dating after 5 years. And he noted that both of them, him and his partner, were crying during that date, because 5 years later, people are not able to move on. They're not able to function. it was very important to take that time to show that, because that's what the Avengers have to live for. Captain America can go around trying to convince people that they should move on, but he knows it's impossible
Yeah.
because there is no way for society at large to recover. And so the only sort of silver lining is, because of the lack of human involvement, the animal ecosystem is thriving again. And Captain America made the comment about having whales in the Hudson.
Yeah.
And so that was interesting to me, because it was only 50% of the population that was wiped out, but it felt like the movie I Am Legend, where the
Yeah.
entire human population is basically gone. Everything is decaying. Nobody is maintaining the streets. When Ant-Man comes out in San Francisco, that place looks like trash.
Exactly.
Everybody is desperate. They don't go into the functional details, but you can imagine maybe some people were committing mass suicides and
Yeah,
all that.
exactly.
So you have these memorials set up for the dead. And I think that's very important, because the very fact that they have memorials show that there is a human quality to remembrance. And that is something that Thanos did not take into
Yeah.
account. And that doesn't get brought up until basically
Until
the
the end.
end of
Yeah.
the movie. Um, so you ask yourself, is it specific to humanity, the way that we couldn't function after 50% of our population was wiped out? Or is it endemic to the entire universe,
Yeah.
basically?
So
So
yeah, so this is my my point. So, and I got a lot of hate in my Thanos video for this, like in the comment section. So basically, people were saying that, like, so my points in the video, he's perfectly written because, well, number one, different from a source material. I thought that the changes were brilliant in the movie. Number two, his plan makes sense, but the way in which I rationalize it is it doesn't make sense from a pragmatic point of view. It makes sense from his perspective, because if you look at Thanos as a character, he introduced this idea of killing half the population on his home world when the planet was already decaying. The planet dies, and because Thanos offered that solution before the planet went to shit, after it's all gone, he lives his entire life with the creed that if they only listened to me, my plan was correct, because now everyone's dead. If they listened to me, this wouldn't have happened. So, like, it's because he's looking for vindication from seeing his entire homeworld die, is because he's clung on to this idea of killing half the population, and it's going to work for everybody. Now, I think something that would have been interesting is, let's say, like, in Infinity War, for example, he talks to Gamora and he's like, you know what's happened in your world? Like, the children born in nothing but clear skies, the paradise. If the Guardians of the Galaxy went to that planet, like in the beginning of this movie, and like they saw that it was a complete shit show, people are like, still broken and people are still gone, that would have actually cemented the idea of course, pragmatically, what he wants to do is terrible and it doesn't work. But because he's very well realized as a character, you're able to see, okay, from his perspective, what he wants to do makes sense. And so it falls into something called the Malthusian paradox, where basically, I think Thomas Malthus is his name. I think he's like some kind of syndicalist, like economist from way back in the day. Basically, like, he had the very similar notion to Thanos, where if you kill off populations as they're growing exponentially, then you'll be able to save people, because the resources will be consumed at a lesser rate than they were if the population was growing out of control. But obviously, I mean, we're a more prosperous society than we ever have been. So, like, obviously, innovation, technology, and the human spirit is, of course, a factor that, someone who is believing in this ideology fervently doesn't really understand. So, yeah, like, I think, like, that's one issue I have with this. Like I wanted to see, like, the ramifications on other planets besides just this one, because of course we know it's not going to work here. 50% of humanity is like almost everybody you've ever known and loved. So I kind of wanted to see it like beyond the scope of what we saw on Earth, if it makes any sense.
yeah, you're right. They don't spend much time on that. I feel like the only person who would have been equipped to answer that question would be Captain Marvel herself, because
Yeah,
she's a more
that's what I thought
global.
she was going to do. Yeah, I thought she was going to like go to like the planets and like, like the hologram thing to do with the Avengers. Like, I thought she was going to like show the different worlds where like Thanos was so convinced he was correct, but then you see Gamora's homeworld and it's a complete wasteland, which I think would have been pretty interesting. But I mean, that's kind of a small complaint. We see it very well motivated on Earth, so it's not a huge deal. But
Yeah,
what I think was
the idea was that the Earth as an exemplar would be enough.
yeah, exactly. But so the thing I think would be interesting is like, what if Thanos knew that his plan didn't work, but he was still obsessed with this idea anyway? And that kind of sells him as kind of a sociopath. So, like, if we look back at Infinity War, if he was saying those things and lying to Gamora about her homeworld basically being, eradicated, it was like, it's the full bellies and clear skies, the paradise. If internally Thanos knows the opposite is true and his plan doesn't work, like, that would do, he truly is a misguided zealot sociopath. And so that would be kind of interesting to see, like, if he already knew that his plan didn't work, but he's a sociopath and he lied about it and justified it to himself because he was so desperate for vindication from his homeworld perishing, which would be interesting.
Actually, we get the answer to that very question in
Yep,
this movie at
exactly.
the end.
Which is,
So,
I have an issue with that as well. But yeah, go on.
well, I don't know how chronologically we want to go in terms of discussing the thematic, but the version of Thanos we encounter in this movie knows that. So,
Yeah,
and I think it's very clever because it was very important for him to have known that, basically.
yeah,
And it was very clever the way that he comes to know that. And I think it's just there are some characters are alive. So 50% of the population dies, meaning 50% of the Avengers die.
hmm
The one who do not stay dead were very judiciously chosen.
hmm
Why is Nebula alive? Nebula is probably the most tragic character in this entire movie,
yeah,
and but on a practical level, she has the ability. She's some basically machine, so she can record uh, things that happen in real time.
yeah,
And when you have time travel involved, of course, because Ant-Man actually sets up this logic where you have quantum entanglement, where in Ant-Man and the Wasp, Scott Lang and Hope and Janet Van Dyne or Hope Van Dyne, their characters their minds are entangled quantum.
hmm
So Nebula actually becomes entangled with herself
hmm
from the past, and so she's able to see what's happening in her future. And Thanos has access to all that information. Basically, hit the download button. Let me see everything she's seen for the last 8 years. And as a result of that, he's completely aware of any way that his plan would fail. But at the same time, if you're able to have that information and you succeeded, that there's a different sort of dynamic that he inspired in
for
you.
sure. That's a good point because, like, he saw not only like the future, but he saw specifically what his plan would do to the world, and like he knows that number one, he carried it out. So there's kind of like a hubristic element there. Like, I did what I wanted to
I
do.
did it. Yes,
Yeah,
right.
but then like he tries to rationalize to himself, like, no, the only reason why this doesn't work is not because bloodshed is like a terrible thing. It's because the people that stay on Earth, the people that are left behind, will do anything to wrestle with the ideas that they cannot understand. So they were able to, they were trying to rationalize and trying to fix the mistakes and fix the terrible thing that happened to them. So like Thanos didn't take that into account because even though you have those people that are gone, even though they're consuming resources at a lesser rate, that doesn't really matter because the intangible element of the human spirit and longing for people that you love is always going to be a more powerful motivating factor than if someone's hungry or not.
Absolutely. And that is his way of underestimating the Avengers. These
Yeah.
are these are things that he should have known. He was told that. So at the end of Avengers, the first Avengers movie, he was the one responsible for sending Loki's army to New York, and the Loki's army was the Chitauri. So the Chitauri had the leader called the Other. I think that was his name.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the movie, the Other has a conversation with Thanos saying that the Avengers, you cannot underestimate them. They are unruly. They cannot be ruled. They will always resist
Mm-hmm.
whatever sort of chaos you try to bring into their world. And Thanos, at the end of that, smiled because it's about courting death, and that was a
Yeah.
reference back to the comics, right?
Yeah.
So he underestimated the Avengers. He underestimated the fact that they would try to resist. Uh, but then that is something that his 2014 iteration will have to deal with, as opposed to his future self. Because the
Exactly.
future self, he does the deed, he's done. There's no way for them to undo it because he destroys the stones. He wants to
Yeah.
make sure that what he did is permanent.
Yeah.
So it's inevitable. It's always going to happen.
Yeah,
That's where that
exactly.
line comes from. I am inevitable. I am the inevitable.
Yeah, exactly. And also, like, there's a change in his perspective as well too, where not only what you just said about underestimating the Avengers, but also the thing is, he spent years and decades of his life. I mean, he's an Eternal, so he's been around for a very, very, very long time. He has spent his entire life idolizing the Infinity Stones. He's spent his entire life trying to plan this thing out and do it. And so, you know, the Thanos that we see in Infinity War is like, it's almost like an intergalactic heist movie in Infinity War. He's going and trying to get every single stone, and he finally has the means to do it. With this one, they're all assembled form, and it's right there.
Yes, that's right.
So like that kind of changes the goal a bit, because like, in Infinity War, it's very much the hero's quest, but here it's like it's all been done for me, and all that's standing in my way are these like motherfuckers who are like trying to kill me. So like so yeah, like I did have a bit of a problem with it when I first saw it, but like now that I've seen it a second time, I'm more at peace with it. Like I really like the hero's journey aspect of Thanos in the first movie. But with this though, I think that regardless of like my interpretation of that, I think that it was well motivated, and also Thanos Thanos was the main character in Infinity War, but this movie
Yes,
was very much about the Avengers. Like, and so like,
yes, that
and
was
it would have taken probably another half an hour to like fully motivate all the things that I was looking for in Thanos. And honestly, it was a 3 hour movie by itself. So I don't think that like, it would have been, it wouldn't have been able to give the very beautiful send offs and the really beautiful payoffs like for all the Avengers if we'd spent all the time on Thanos again, which I think was a smart move in their part.
so that's why they had to kill Thanos in the beginning, and it was important to kill him. So somebody like Thor got it out of his system, kind of where he had all this guilt for not going through the head, and he
Yeah.
finally does it. But it's completely useless because Thanos already did what he did, and he destroyed the stones. You can't undo what he did. So the idea was, if the stones were still there, they would just take them and undo it at that moment.
Yeah.
But now they couldn't. So storytelling wise, there was another challenge posed to them in order for them to actually undo what Thanos does.
Yeah.
And if Thanos had not underestimated them, he would have assumed that they would just cope with their failure.
Yeah.
But the Avengers are incapable of doing that. So they had to fight back, they had to resist, and they had to find a solution. But now this is where it becomes interesting, because then this is where you have to do very important work to set up your characters at the moment of their failure. How does that failure, how does the weight of it affect who they are fundamentally? And it's a way to affect them fundamentally. It's not just affecting them on the surface.
Yeah.
It's affecting their entire being,
Purpose. Yeah. The purpose. Yeah.
their purpose. More specifically, Iron Man himself. After when he comes back, when Captain Marvel rescues him, he has all this onrush of emotions. It was something that pays off a line where he says that Spider-Man: Homecoming, he really, he considers himself to be Peter Parker's mentor,
Yeah. Surrogate father, basically. Yeah.
surrogate father. He never had a son, so Peter Parker is his child figure. He's very overprotective of him. Basically, doesn't want to put him in any sort of danger, and he admonishes Peter Parker for being a reckless person. He says, "Well, what if you die? Your death is going to be on me, and I don't want that on my conscience."
Yeah.
Well, Peter Parker dies.
In his arms too.
Is it in his arms? And that's the most devastating thing that could happen to him as a character. So he takes that personally, and he has to lash out that anger. He lashes it out at Captain America for betraying him.
Yeah.
Basically, the point was Tony Stark had been haunted by Thanos ever since he defeated Loki's armies in New York. He had all these nightmares. When Scarlet Witch during Age of Ultron messed with his mind, he saw a vision of basically what would happen if he basically didn't sacrifice himself.
Yeah.
The Avengers would be dead. Captain America's shield was broken. All of that stuff.
Yeah.
He was doing everything in his power to prevent that from happening.
Yeah. And actually, Captain America even says, and he grabs him like his legs and says, "You could have saved us." And like,
You could have saved us. You could
yeah.
have saved us. You could have done more. Why didn't you do more?
Yeah.
And so you're living with the weight of that guilt. Everything you do everything in your power to prevent it from happening. You want to keep the Avengers together. You want to create some type of robot program, a suit of armor around the world so they can protect humanity at all costs. And then you have this guy, this villain, Captain America, basically breaking the Avengers apart.
Yeah.
And thereby reducing any chance you have to win because the Avengers are no longer together. So that's why he says, we couldn't beat Thanos, you weren't there.
Yeah.
So he's fundamentally broken. And as a result, because he has failed, he basically takes himself out of the equation. He's done, he's retired, he has his family, he has one thing to live for, he wants to protect it at all costs. I'm done, I'm not going to get involved. And I don't even trust you guys, so I can't get involved with you guys.
Yeah.
Thanos won, we can't undo it, we have to move on. And so that's where he is. Captain America, as is his want, has to differ from Tony Stark. He's on a different sort of level. He needs to remain the emotional backbone of the team, trying to keep the team together, give him some type of purpose. And Natasha Romanoff herself. So Steve Rogers and Natasha Romanoff, what I think they have in common is they do not have any meaning outside of the Avengers. The Avengers is an entity that gives them meaning.
Yeah.
It gives them a family. Because Steve Rogers is a man out of time. He was taken from his own timeline where he could have had he could have lived with the love of his life. Doesn't have that option anymore. Was never able to adapt to anything other than that. Natasha, same thing. All aspects of her personality were taken from her at a young age, and so when she joined Shield, when she joined the Avengers, it gave her purpose. It gave her meaning, and so losing that is something that she cannot cope with. That's why she has to be the one running some type of Avengers team. Say, hey, why don't we go deal with this petty crime happening here and there? Like, let's do something. We can't do nothing,
Yeah.
So that's where she is. But it's not as bad as others. The only person who has any sort of semblance of a good life is Bruce Banner, who finally has been able to resolve his issues with the Hulk. He becomes Professor Hulk, where he's made peace with Bruce Banner, meaning on a larger sense, he's made peace with what's happened. So he's the only one smiling. He's the only one happy. He's posing for photos with the fans and everything. You can say he's the only one who's legitimately content.
Yeah.
And then finally, in terms of the core Avengers, you had the two bad cases, which is Thor and Clint Barton. Clint Barton basically becomes an assassin. He's doing good work in terms of he's killing
bad people,
but he's killing them ruthlessly.
Yeah.
Which is actually goes against the Avengers code. So eventually he needed to be stopped. It's kind of like what the Punisher does, basically.
Exactly.
You're taking out cartels, you're taking out the Yakuza, but that is not the Avengers way. So he had to be stopped at some point. And then Thor, now, I don't even know where to begin with. Well, actually, I'll let you.
Yeah. It's basically like the thing with Thor. Okay, so when I first saw Fat Thor, so, like when I first saw him like that, I was like, come on, this is the choice they make. Like come on, like he's a silly fucking character. He was already silly. Come on, but now I think about it, I'm just like, he is honestly the most tragic character in the entire thing. Like, all of his people are dead. Like, everyone he's ever known and loved is dead. His father is dead. He watched his mom get killed by a dark elf in the second Thor movie. He has no one to love anymore. All of his friends basically think he's a failure. And he himself is saddled with this guilt of, I was this close to stopping this entire terrible thing, and it's my fault. He was the
only one who could have done it, and he failed to do that.
Exactly. Like, and it was no fault of his own, because, like, if you get an axe to the chest, like, you're pretty sure the guy's gonna die. Like if I were betting that, I think like a big magical axe to the chest would probably kill somebody. And so, but he didn't intend that, and he didn't expect that Thanos would be as durable as he was. And so, because of that, because of all the tragedies experienced, like, he's a completely broken and defeated person. And even though it's played for comedy, there's a real element of tragedy with that character, where,
absolutely,
like he's a guy who, like I said, has been defeated by his own experiences. He can't handle the fact that not only is the world fundamentally for the worse now, it's in part mostly because of me. which is like, and then he drinks a lot of beer and like,
And the only thing I can say to sort of defend that artistic choice is it actually makes sense. So
no, for sure. I agree with you. When I first saw it, I was like, "Oh, come on, this is stupid." But like, as like 30 minutes went on, it's like, "Oh my god!" Like, he's a guy who suffered immense loss. Like, it would make sense for him to like be like that for sure.
right, he's actually not the first Asgardian to whom that has happened. So if you remember Thor Ragnarok, we saw in Valkyrie's backstory, her entire crew, the Valkyries, were defeated by Hela.
Yep.
They were literally decimated by Hela, and so she was the only survivor. And she basically exiled herself in Sakaar, and she was drinking as heavily as Thor was at that time.
Yeah.
Because if you're an Asgardian and you suffer mass genocide, you can't recover from that. You have to drink. You have to keep drinking. But
Yeah.
the difference between them two is a Valkyrie is a proper warrior. That is the meaning of her existence. Therefore, she could not let herself go. I'm sure between the drinking and whatever, she was still training as a warrior. But then Thor, because that the weight of his failure affects him so much more, because I don't think Valkyrie could have defeated Hela, but Thor could have defeated Thanos. And because he didn't do that, he relinquishes his role as Asgardian prince or Asgardian king, and relinquishes his role as some type of warrior. So he lets himself go in that way. And yeah, I think there might be an issue with that role being a little bit too comical. But then if you're a fair movie watcher, you'll see the layer of drama underneath all of that.
Yeah, for sure.
But not everybody will be able to see that. It's kind of subtle. So.
Yeah, well, exactly. Like, and we're kind of like fanboys from Marvel, and not only that, but like we analyze these movies like we do on this podcast for like hours and hours and hours. So like we're poised to be able to say, okay, yeah, it's a silly, funny character, but like when you really think about it, it does imply a really serious amount of tragedy for this character. And obviously, like, it was just funny to see him shirtless and like with Korg and Meek like playing fucking Fortnite.
Fortnite.
what was it? Noob Slayer 69 or something like that?
Nude, yeah. Was it Nude, right? Or Noob? I don't remember.
But either way, that was hilarious. Like, that was, oh my god, that was so funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like yeah, I think we've laid out those 6 characters, what they were doing, but so like this kind of moves me into like my big theme of this movie. And I think I'll be, I already am kind of doing a video essay on this. It's coming along nicely. And for people watching, I have some exciting stuff to tell you about what I'm going to do for Endgame. I have a kind of a series of videos that's going to be released within the next couple weeks or a month or whatever. So the most profound thing I think of this movie was the theme of, it's twofold. It's Avengers Endgame is a testament on, 1, accepting your mistakes, and 2, creating or redefining your purpose. So if we look at a character like Black Widow, for example, she literally has a speech where she says, like, I can't accept my mistakes, I can't move on, because honestly, like, this gives me purpose, this gives me meaning, and without this, I have nothing. Same thing with Captain America. Captain America, like, as a character, like you said, he's a man stuck out of time. He really has no meaning in his life except for this. With Thor has been defeated by his own mistakes and defeated by his own errors, and it takes him to, truly, see what's at stake for him to actually, go the God mode again and have the hammer and Stormbreaker. But it's all about that subtle balance of accepting what's happened and then creating purpose out of that, where you don't let your mistakes define you. You accept them, you internalize them, and you use them to be better. And I feel like, very metaphysically, this movie is a beautiful testament on self-improvement and sharing your pain and trying to better yourself through your tragedy experiences. Like, if that makes any sense.
Oh, that makes perfect sense.
Like, and like, yeah, and like, with Iron Man too, he has those 2 elements as well, but he also has a degree of self-sacrifice where legitimately he's taken the terrible things in his past and he's tried to internalize them in a way that's positive. Case in point, he has a family with Pepper Potts now. And so, like, not only does he accept the mistakes and create his own purpose out of his mistakes, he does it in a way where there's also self-sacrifice involved, because he knows that if something happens, like, he's going to lose the one thing that's given him any kind of solace or happiness over the last 5 years after Thanos did what he did. So, yeah, just the thematic expression of every character subtly accepting their mistakes, accepting what's happened, and then moving on and creating purpose and vindicating themselves as a result. I think that was just, to me, that was the most brilliant part of the movie. Like, seeing each character find inner peace and accept their mistakes was really beautiful. Honestly, I was moved to tears a couple times in the movie. Like, I'll be honest, I was crying like a little bitch.
And I think is what's admirable is how they did it. So when it comes to we spend a lot of time setting up the context of the movie.
Yeah,
They go to kill Thanos, and then they know that they cannot undo it. They don't have a means to do that. It is not until Ant-Man shows up where they have any sort of semblance of a plan that can actually work. And so at that point, the team was already split. All of those people you mentioned went their own ways, and they had to be recruited back into the team. And so it was very interesting. What it was interesting is that none of them had to be coerced. Like, you can't say the universe depends on you. You have to come back. All of them had to make the rational and the self-imposed choice to come back and do what they have to do to save humanity. And that's not a decision you can come to lightly, right? So
yeah,
Tony Stark had to be convinced. Bruce Banner had to be convinced. Thor had to be convinced. Everybody else was already sort of ready to do it. And these are main characters who had to be convinced to come back and to accept their mistakes and basically take their chance to atone for them.
yeah,
Tony Stark understands that he is the only. So the reason why he was alive, Doctor Strange, for a while, I thought the reason why Doctor Strange found it necessary for him to be alive was he was the only one who could figure out time travel in this universe.
yeah,
So that could have been the end of his responsibility. I'm the only one who figured this out. I figured this out. I can enable you guys to go back to the past to fix the mistakes. But that, of course, he had to be a participant himself, and it took a lot of character building in that moment to get him to that point.
yeah,
And some of the lines, in something like that, you build through dialogue. That's the only way to That's the only method to convey all of that. And so the dialogue he has is with Pepper Potts, the whole resting thing. I figured it out, but I can just easily erase this. But if I don't, and then Pepper Potts reminds him, if you don't act, will you ever be able to rest? And that's Tony Stark. Tony Stark is a mechanic. That is his essence.
yeah,
You saw that in Iron Man 3. Whether he doesn't has his suit or not, it is his intellect that is the most important part about him.
yeah,
He figured it out in that movie, and he says, "Well, okay, I'm game. I have to do it for the sake of humanity. I
yeah,
tried saving them before, I failed, but this is another chance. I'll do it." And Thor eventually does that. But by the time the actual plot of the movie rolls along, I feel like all of them are emotionally ready, except for Thor himself. He still needed extra motivation, and he gets that during his own trip.
exactly.
Whereas
Which I thought was brilliant.
perhaps everybody else gets that before leaving. So
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of like, speaks to the fact that you know, like the rebirth they gave Thor, just like in general, from these movies, from Infinity War, then Thor Ragnarok to this, like the rebirth of Thor was such a, it was so weird because like you never really associate a character like that with a massive gut that's like, like reeling from his experiences and is like crying. But like, man, like yeah, like now I think about it, like Fat Thor really fit in like very, very well with this movie because, like you said, it makes sense in his own character arc where he's somebody who has had largely, not in terms of like emotion, but has had kind of a charmed life. Like he's this demigod who's like, immortal and he's super powerful. He lived the early parts of life very, very arrogant, and like obviously he's been humanized in the later iterations of his character. But yeah,
but
like
he's a god, right?
what's
He's a
that?
literal god of thunder.
Yeah,
So he has the highest highs, but also the low lows. So
exactly.
you have to be honest about that.
Yeah.
If somebody has to hit rock bottom, his rock bottom is a lot. So,
Yeah, exactly. And so like, yeah, like just to that character specifically, like he's yeah, like one of the most dynamic characters and one of the most effective ones in the MCU for sure. And this movie kind of sells in the fact that like he's a a really powerful person, but it kind of shows that even the most powerful of your team can fall, and even the most powerful of your team needs a push sometimes. And the person giving the push is, one is mother, but two is CGI talking raccoon who swears. Which so all right, so let's we've kind of set up each character's arc
yes.
singularly, and we've kind of talked
Let's
to the
get into
themes
the
of the movie.
plot.
All right, so let's get into the plot. Obviously, we kind of set up they're reeling from their own terrible experiences. They find out the eventuality of time travel, and then basically all the Avengers plus Nebula go back in time to each successive movies that interested the Infinity Stones at the first time. So the three that they pick, of course, are 2012, the Avengers, and then Fight in New York, where they have the Time Stone, the Mind Stone, the Space Stone, all in basically a 3-mile radius of each other. They also pick 2013, which is Thor: The Dark World, where they have
Yes.
the Reality Stone. And then they have the Guardians of the Galaxy, where they have the Soul Stone and the Power Stone. So just
2014,
focusing on
yes.
like, what's that?
In 2014.
Yeah, in 2014, yeah. So just focus. Let's start with New York first. The way that they get every single stone, I thought was absolutely brilliant. Like, just first of all, my favorite part of the movie is when it's a beautiful callback to the Winter Soldier, where Captain America's in the elevator and is like, we're doing tests on that. Are you really? It's fine. Hail Hydra, and then just walks out with the case. Like that was the most brilliant writing I've ever heard in my life. Oh
Yes.
my god, that was so
But
good.
here's the thing. Here's the thing. So the whole elevator thing, even spatially where they were, he went into the middle.
Yep. Crossbones
That
to his right. Yeah.
is a visual callback. But then the Hail Hydra thing was from the comics, a very recent comic. It was maybe a couple of years at most,
Yeah.
where everybody lost their minds because, oh my God, Captain America was a Hydra agent. So it was a very clever way for the MCU, to respond to that. A comic that was written maybe a comic that was written after these movies came out. So
Yeah.
I think that was a very clever thing for them to have done. Yes.
Yeah. Incredibly clever. And so, that's one specific instance, but some of the plot elements reminded me a lot of like a Back to the Future 2 screwball comedy, where it's like, they're sneaking around, they can't be seen, they don't want to be seen, and they're finally seen by their old selves. The two Captain Americas fight each other. Yeah, like
And they fight. Their techniques mirror each other. Makes
exactly.
sense. And
Yeah.
then probably the older Captain America, the 2012 Captain America, is probably a little bit stronger. So he was gonna win, but he was disarmed by
Disarmed.
the
Yeah.
knowledge that Bucky Barnes was still alive. So that was an interesting way to do that.
Yeah. It was very, very smart. And then so of course that's the Mind Stone taken care of after they fight. The Space Stone, obviously, they have the plan where they're trying to separate it from the Shield agents that are transporting it. Which of course, like Ant-Man sends Tony Stark in a cardiac arrest, and then basically there's a whole commotion, and then Loki gets a hold of the Space Stone and basically goes away. So they have to get the other
He
Space Stone in
disappears.
another time. But I thought the pairing of the Hulk and the Ancient One was really, really clever. I thought and like I love the fact that the Ancient One pushed out Bruce Banner's astral form, so like they could be talking face to face as human beings. I thought that was absolutely brilliant. And also the way in which the Ancient One is kind of like coerced into giving him the stone was very clever. Where
Yes, they didn't have
referencing
to
how
fight
strange
for it.
say again.
It's important that you don't have to fight for every single stone. In this case, it was through negotiation, basically.
Yeah.
But then, and this is where you as a director make the sort of what's the best way to make the choice to leave all of the lead work to movies you've already made. So Doctor Strange establishes who Stephen Strange is as a character. And so when Hulk brings up the fact that if the nature of his position was to defend the Mind Stone, I'm sorry, the Time Stone, and he gives it up willingly, that means the Ancient One basically has to do that as well. So it's something that relies upon our understanding of the essence of Doctor Strange in order for her to make that decision.
Yeah.
And so these are the ways. You can call it a shortcut, but it was an earned shortcut because we've spent enough time with Doctor Strange to know exactly what would have motivated him to make that decision. She was not in a position to know. Oh, he gave it up willingly. I can't believe it. Well, Doctor Strange, Stephen Strange is the best of us. So if he did it, he must have a reason. Here we go. And I think that's one of the clever ways that you can tell a story, because you've already done all of this work to establish who these characters are, and you can just basically rely exclusively upon that and for an important plot point. This is the acquisition of a stone. That's a very important moment in the movie, and you didn't have to fight for it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So at that point you have two of them successfully retrieved.
Yeah, exactly. And then of course, focusing on like, this one plot point, they're out of Pym particles. They have a round trip and they lost the stone because Loki takes it. So of course, the only other time they've seen the Space Stone in person is back in when Howard Stark actually produced Captain America as a super soldier, way back.
It's later than that. It's 1970. So at that point, they were still doing heavy research.
Sorry, it was the 70s. You're right.
They don't go back all the way to
the 40s,
basically the wartime. Yeah. And I think that was important. So that wasn't important. That was important for both of them, and it was important that it was the two of them going in the 1970s. Yeah. What you have to see is that obviously when you make the choices of splitting up the team and how you split them up, those are very important choices you have to make from the directors themselves making those choices to put those characters together, but also from a practical point of view as well, where each trip has to matter. It has to matter that it is these people going to that location.
Yeah.
So they go to the 1970s.
Yeah,
1970 rather. So what are the two characters that are very important for them to have encountered in that time? For
Peggy
Tony
and Howard,
is Howard Stark, his father. And for Captain America is Peggy Carter. And this is the most crucial elements of their character arcs. What are their biggest unresolved issues? Tony Stark has daddy issues. He never got along with his father, and he never was able to reconcile the fact that he didn't say a proper goodbye to him. He didn't understand who his father was. But clearly, the fact that Winter Soldier killed him was emotionally devastating, that he was willing to basically almost kill Bucky Barnes and Captain America for that, for that vengeance. And he had created this system back in Civil War. They call it the BARF system, where he would visualize the last time they saw his parents, because he still has unresolved emotional issues with the fact that they were gone. And you can say that his entire existence after that, the whole playboy billionaire thing, all of that was a response to him being emotionally broken by the poor relationship he had with his father. So it was very important for him to have encountered his father basically at the same stage of life that he is in, where he was literally just about to be born. So his father was going to be a new father.
Yeah.
How did he feel about Tony? Why was he cold? All of these are answers that Tony got, and it was very rewarding for him to have seen his father interacted with him and know exactly what's going on. And so he says, I have a feeling everything's going to be okay, because at that moment we know that he has basically resolved all of the issues he had regarding his relationship with his father. On the Captain America side, it was very important for him to have interacted with Peggy Carter, because he finally was able to see her being successful without him in a sort of medium. I'm not sure, eventually in Civil War, she had been married and stuff, she had a family, but then maybe it took a long time, 1970 to 1942, those 28 years or whatever. It maybe took that long for her to have found the happiness that she eventually had.
Yeah.
But maybe there was a hole in her heart that was repaired. There was certainly a hole in Steve's heart that was never repaired. So it was important for him to have interacted with her, and eventually that will inform a decision he makes at the end of the two. So that's why it was important for them to go back to 1970, and that trip they are successful in getting
Not only
the
the space
Tesseract,
stone, but also the Pym
but they
particles.
are
Yeah.
also but Captain America also gets Pym particles, and that's a moment of dramatic irony. It's basically only him and us that know that he has that,
Yeah.
and we don't really see what they're used for until once again towards the end of the movie. And so that journey was important for them, and they were successful on two different fronts. They resolved, or at least got ideas about how to resolve their personal issues, and they finally were able to retrieve the Tesseract.
Yeah.
They could have
Exactly.
gone any other time, but it was specific that they go to that time, that location,
Yeah.
and they see the people that they saw.
Yeah. It was very, very important for them to do that for sure. Um,
Right.
all right. So let's talk about the other.
Asgard 2013.
Well, the Asgard one. Let's do that after this.
Okay,
Let's talk
sure.
about 2014 first. So
All right.
the one that really like broke me was the pairing of Hawkeye and Black Widow going to the Soul Stone. That was a genius way to center their characters, because if you remember in the Avengers, when Black Widow is speaking to Loki, after he's been apprehended and after he's kind of said like, you slivering quim, like fuck you, whatever kind of a
Mewling.
Shakespeare, yeah, whatever the hell it is, like whatever Shakespearean pretentious
Yeah.
douchey thing you want to say.
So mewling quim is a very Shakespeare way of saying you whining bitch, basically.
Yeah, yeah, something like that. But yeah, like yeah. Anyway, that was pretty funny. But anyway, so in that conversation in the first Avengers movie, Loki alludes to the fact that, oh, you love Barton, and Black Widow's like, love is for kids, but I owe him a debt. And so you hear about the fact that basically they spared each of each other's successive lives when they were interacting as assassins way back in the day. And then
Right.
of course Black Widow was her life was spared by Hawkeye. And so we see in this moment that we see two things. One, that platonically or romantically, who even knows, those two characters really do love each other at a point where it kind of transcends this whole kind of work wife kind of thing they have going. But also we see Natasha in real time actually repaying the debt that she planted the seed of in 2012 in the first Avengers, which like that was such a beautiful, beautiful character arc. And honestly, like, I wasn't even like that big of a fan of Black Widow and Hawkeye before this movie. Of course, I knew how important they are as characters, but they really gave them like a beautiful send off in a way where it delivers kind of new context for their characters and gives them a new appreciation for them, but also it delivers on a bid that they planted years and years and years ago. Which
Yes.
like they thought very, very long and hard about how to pair the characters for getting each Infinity Stone, and each Infinity Stone kind of makes sense like in their own character arcs. Like they're getting this specific one, like the Time Stone with Bruce Banner. Obviously, it makes a lot of sense because he's the one who actually cracks the time travel with Tony Stark. But speaking of the Soul Stone, that was probably one of the best scenes in the movie, or if not the best.
Absolutely.
And also, the thing I thought was really beautiful about that is each one doesn't want to live without the other, but they also are both willing to have the sacrifice. So like they're actually having a legitimate fist fight to try and see who's going to sacrifice themselves, because they know that each of them love each other enough where either one of them sacrifice themselves would ultimately yield the Soul Stone to whoever
Right.
survives. So the fact that they were able to have that scene where it's not like there's a reluctance to it and it's not like there's any bitterness. Each one knows that one of their lives is necessary to actually extract the Soul Stone from Vormir, but it's the intense struggle of who is actually going to do it. And I think they made a wise choice with having Black Widow have her character arc be sealed in that moment for sure.
And they had to fight for it. And both of them. So one of the lines from the Avengers that Black Widow repeats a couple of times is, "I have read on my ledger. I like to wipe it." And so Clint Barton acquired that red ledger in this movie. As when he was Ronan, he was killing all these people. So they both owe a debt to society where they have to atone for all of the lives they've taken, but also they owe a debt to each other, as you said. So they fought for it. Eventually, Natasha is the one who has to sacrifice herself, and it makes sense on an emotional level. And one thing I appreciate is that they could have easily taken shortcuts in that scene because we
Yeah.
had already seen Thanos do that. We had already seen um, the Red Skull basically giving the same speech. It was important for him to repeat it to these characters because they're experiencing it for the first time. So you don't skip over those details. And the scenes mirrored each other from Infinity War, where visually and in terms of the music they use, in terms of the dialogue, everything was mirrored. And it was very important to convey the emotional weight of that scene through a repetition of those elements, even though we had already seen them. But it was important for those elements to be repeated.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just a brilliant pairing of characters, and honestly, it's like I said, like this movie elevates every single MCU movie that came before it, especially the ones that they reference outright.
Absolutely.
There are so many bids and payoffs that like were honestly like they probably didn't even like conceive of the fact that they were going to pay that moment off like years and years and years ago. But the Russo brothers, being as cunning and as talented as they are, they capitalized on that specific aspect for their own character arcs they're laying out in this movie. It was absolutely beautiful, and to see Natasha do that, it like you said, the sheer emotional beauty and tragedy in that moment is brought about by the repetition of the scene from Infinity War. But also, I mean, it's just like it culminates her entire character arc where
Yes.
she's willing to make the sacrifice for Barton because they're so close and so inextricably linked. Which yeah, it really was just a emotional knockout of a scene. That was my first kind of tear I shed in the movie because like each character was so willing to die for the other one. It was yeah, really beautiful.
Oh, well, you held out a lot longer than I did.
When did you tear up?
I feel the first time was, I think, when Ant-Man reunited her.
Oh
That
man,
was a
that was
pretty emotional one, I think.
yeah,
Because he went through all the like he was at the memorial. He was looking for her name. They finally see each other. You realize she is so big. All of
yeah,
the time that he has missed. I mean, he was only gone for 5 hours, but it was 5 years in real time, and
yeah,
you see all that he has missed, and he was so glad that she was okay because she's the one who means the most to him. Um, for me, that was the first sort of very emotional scene,
yeah,
and then
for
there
sure.
were others after that as well.
Yeah, man.
All right, so that covers what,
Soul
four
Stone.
or five.
Yeah, yeah,
So that the last one is the Power Stone in Morag,
yeah,
which they had to retrieve before Quill does it. So we repeat the initial scene of Guardians of the Galaxy.
yeah. Come get your
But you
love
look at
being
it from
played.
the
Yeah,
outside. It's funny because you have the outside perspective of this fool dancing around, listening to music, taking these whatever these alien creatures is singing in their
yeah.
faces.
And then they
You look at
cut.
it from the outside, you realize how stupid that is. But then you, as the audience, enjoyed it immensely in when that Guardians of the Galaxy came out. But then you
Yeah,
look at it from an outside perspective, you're like, yeah, that was very silly.
yeah, exactly. I forget the storytelling device. So basically, it's there are sounds that are heard by just the characters, and there are sounds that are heard by just the audience. And there, it kind of subverts your expectation because you assume that okay, it's being played loud enough, and the characters dancing to it. That means that it's linked to the entire world, and everyone is hearing what he's hearing. But to have it be a third party perspective, looking at him with the headphones on, just like dancing around, it's like God, it's stupid. it's
Yeah, and that was very clever humor. It's meta humor.
Exactly. It's super meta. But yeah, so I like that element of it, and also I was a big fan of how they utilized Nebula. Now,
Yes.
the fact that like they got this stone, and then at the last second, basically, the link to her past self essentially is the thing that keeps her from doing the jump out of the
From
quantum
leaving,
realm.
right.
Exactly. I thought that was very clever, and also it sets up the whole kind of Trojan horse aspect of the latter part of the movie when
Yes.
the past Nebula takes her decal, like her Ravager decals, and then goes back into the present day, and then basically allows for the eventuality of Thanos coming and erupting
Right.
from the quantum realm.
And she was the device to enable Thanos to know. Because I think what was very important is you don't wanna underpower your villain because you had already seen him in the previous movie. you have to make sure that Thanos is as powerful as he can be in this movie, and his biggest weapon was information. So he had all the information he needed, and he also had a spy, a mole within the team. But I think it was also important to show the scenes between Nebula, our version of Nebula, 2019 Nebula, I guess, or
Yeah.
in that case, 2023 or whatever,
Yeah.
and Nebula 2014, who was a very different character. So you can see the progression that the character makes based on
Exactly.
who she was before and who she is now. What was her biggest motivation? She wanted to please Thanos, and Gamora was in that realm as well. But Gamora was already in the process of betraying Thanos
Yeah.
because she does that in 2014. We saw that in Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah. It's the inciting incident for the
Nebula
movie. Yeah.
Nebula was an even more tragic character because she tried even harder than Gamora. She was never as strong as Gamora. Thanos did not love her the way he loved the Gamora, and she
Yeah.
knew that. So that's why she had to double her ability to please Thanos. And in the end, where the new Nebula kills, so basically, where Nebula ultimately ends up is she is given a choice. You are told what your future is going to be. Literally, the version of you future. Imagine if your future self came 10 years into the past to tell you exactly what you're going to be, and you're still unable to make the choice to basically become that version of you. That just shows you the weight of that emotional choice.
Yeah.
And I think it was. I don't think that. So there were two options: either you redeem her, or you show herself to be basically unredeemable in that moment, and you have to kill her. And because that's what ends up happening. I think both of them would have been equally effective, but I think it made sense for them to have gone with this version of the story.
Yeah, for sure. It made a lot of sense in terms of the character
Yeah,
arcs because,
it
like,
sort of accentuates the amount of tragedy that she has gone to.
exactly. Honestly, aside from Thor, she's the one who's really lost the most. I mean, like, she's lost her body.
Absolutely.
Like, she's
She
lost her
lost her
own,
body.
self actualization. Like, she's been completely mutilated by somebody who basically his whole motive was to make her a better warrior. Basically, like, subject her to the physical torture for years and years and years. Like she's the
Exactly.
yeah, and like, she was taken from her own home and brainwashed essentially from by Thanos. So, like, the fact that she played actually a more pivotal role in this one. I haven't been wild about Nebula in the past, but here they actually center off her character very, very nicely. They actually give her
Yes.
a lot of good
Both
things to
both
do.
versions, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly, exactly. And yeah, so then when we're left the Ether, which is Thor 2. Um,
yes.
some of the funniest banter between Rocket Raccoon and Thor. That was very, very funny. And also, one, I love the finality that basically Freya gives to Thor after they
Yes.
talk the first time. Freya, of course, like, for people that don't know Norse mythology, Freya is basically the all-seeing, almost witch of the Norse gods. She's basically an overseer and almost like a clairvoyant psychic. And basically, that's why she's able to see Thor, not just from the physical appearance that he is currently in when he's, needs to hit the gym a little bit, but also, like, he's able to see through him where she knows that he's from a different time and is doing something singularly to get the reality stone out of this time. So I really love that, and also I just loved the emotional climax of him getting his hammer back. I just even though Stormbreaker is a more sauced up version of Mjolnir, I still thought it was just a beautiful moment to have him actually get his hammer back. That was great.
Yes, and that was for us. That was the first time we've seen him confirmation that he was still worthy of the hammer.
Yeah,
Because you would assume that after everything that has happened to him, he has lost his worthiness to carry it. But then when he retrieves it, that was the confirmation we needed. That was a confirmation he needed, and therefore that's the first time in the movie where he's actually a whole again. He had this big. When I say whole, I mean entire. He had this big hole in him,
yeah,
uh, this big gap that he struggled to fill with something. The conversation with his mom is what ended up doing it,
exactly.
and that's why ends. So in your theme of accepting mistakes and creating purpose, the mother herself knows her doom is impending, but she still embraces it. She could have you could have said she could have been warned that she's gonna die, and she would have done something different so that she ensures her own survival.
Yeah,
But she is the first example. at least concretely in this movie, that we see a character accepting their fate and allowing the story to go on through that. You accept your fate, but I know you're gonna be okay.
Yeah.
And the theme of we're gonna be okay is very important in this movie as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in the final moments, we see that. But yeah, so essentially, after, at this point, all the stones are retrieved and they're able to come back to the present. Of course, Natasha's not with them. And also, Nebula is also not. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, is the past Nebula. So the way in which it plays that next is very interesting because it kind of sets up the eventuality, of course, of the tragic
The
ending that we
climax.
see. But basically,
Exactly.
it shows a couple things once they assemble all the Infinity Stones into Iron Man's technology. One, Iron Man's technology is more than capable of actually capitalizing the power of the Infinity Stones. And two, using them if you're not completely durable and are almost like a godlike character carries a very, very big price. It will it nearly mutilated Bruce Banner, and I don't think that if I remember correctly, I think that any injury from the Infinity Stones is permanent, so he's permanently going to look like that, like with the
Okay.
yeah,
Maybe that makes sense because in the comics, technically, it's not going to be the same extent as a Wolverine or Deadpool, but he does have a healing factor.
exactly,
So in theory, Hulk can heal pretty quickly, but
yeah,
not instantaneously the way Deadpool would, for example.
exactly. But yeah, and that kind of sets up the eventuality where if a human were to use the Infinity Stones, it's certain death essentially, which is what we see in the latter part of the film with Tony Stark, which again another teal fall on that one, but yeah. So then after that, essentially Nebula, of course, is a covert ops kind of person. So after Bruce snaps and brings everyone back, and seeing Barton get his phone back and like looking at his wife
Yeah,
calling
man.
him, that was a beautiful moment too. That was really beautiful. But having I thought it was very, very clever how basically Nebula legitimately brought the fight to the Avengers, and brought Thanos' entire ship, which of course means his entire army comes with
His
him.
entire army. And
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
important because Thanos could have invaded Earth on two occasions. He never sent his entire army.
Yeah,
In New York, he only sent the Chitauri. In Wakanda, he only sent the I forgot their name. Those the six-legged creatures.
I
I
forget,
forgot.
but
I
yeah,
forgot their name. But
yeah,
half of his army was sent on both times. In this case, it's a full-scale invasion, so it's all or nothing at this point.
yeah,
And you can see it's kind of like it has to be sort of an intergalactic fight. So it's not just the human resources that will have to respond, it's the entire universe that has to come together to prevent basically a repeat of and this is and during the conflict is where Thanos finally crystallizes his plan. He says he recognizes that his original plan would be doomed to fail because you have people who
remember, yeah,
has this resilience. This is the point where he no longer underestimates his enemies, and then he takes his characterization to its logical extent. Thanos is a godlike creature, and he thinks of himself as the god. Therefore, the logical conclusion of everything he wants to accomplish is literally to accomplish what God does, which is resetting the entire universe and creating a new universe anew. So
yeah.
so the concept of creation, the Big Bang, anything, that's what Thanos wants to accomplish, and that is his ultimate thing. You can't destroy half the population. You have to basically reset the whole thing. And so that's where the stakes are established in the final fight. If Thanos, we use the gauntlet, everybody is back. You have to use the gauntlet one more time. If you use it one more time, by the good guys, our characters, it would basically erase Thanos' army. If Thanos gets his hands on it and uses it, it would basically reset the entire universe. So that's where you have intergalactic stakes at play here in the climax of the movie.
Exactly. And so this goes in like my only issue with the movie. Um so I fully understand Thanos' character arc in this movie, and I fully understand why he believes like, in the end the destruction of life is basically like the only thing that's really going to result in what he actually wants, which is like a universe born out of salvation. So I totally get
Yes.
that. My only issue with that though is like I understand it's a different kind of situation because the Thanos that we are viewing is not the same Thanos that we saw in Infinity War, so it's a different kind of eventuality there. My problem is that like the whole point of his character, at least from what it's laid out as, is he is so defeated by the experience of seeing his entire homeworld destroyed. He offers a solution, which is killing half the population. He warned them, and even though it's an incorrect solution, because they die after he proposes that, then he believes his entire life that he was the correct one, and he wants to vindicate himself. My problem here is the fact that the change in perspective, it makes him, how do I put this? It makes him less of a misguided zealot, if it makes any sense, because like in the first movie, he is so devoted to this idea of, he almost worships his own plan like a religion. Like he he has like the Black Order and is like, salvation is imminent, children. You are all like, children of Thanos and death, like all that stuff. And with this though, it kind of diminishes the emotional weight of Infinity War for me a bit because, the whole point is, even though he knows he's incorrect, his plan is the only thing that he believes will save the universe, and no one's going to tell him otherwise. Now, in this case, I do concede that because it's essentially himself telling him the information by having Nebula, give the memories of the last 5 years to him. I get that it's a change in perspective, but just something about it just seems like it just didn't really hit me as emotionally impactfully as Infinity War's Thanos did. But I agree with you. It was very, very well written. It was well realized and was well set up. I just thought that the zealot nature of Infinity War was a little more compelling to me. But I mean,
yeah, sure. I just can't think of what else. What other option you have? That is the logical conclusion.
No, I'm not saying it's not logical at all. I think it's very well written. But like, just I don't know. It's just like a Thanos.
Emotional payoff is a different beast. It's not the same question. But I agree. Yeah, I can agree with you.
Exactly, yeah. But I mean, regardless, Thanos is a very well written character, and I plan to do an addendum on the video I did. Like but not like shitting on the movie. I just want to juxtapose what he believes in Infinity War to what he believes in Endgame, and like the differences that come about by having a different Thanos altogether in the story. I think it's a pretty interesting parallel you can draw from that.
Yeah, I think well, that's going to be a challenging topic, but I think you can.
So, yeah, we can collab. Come on, we're two decently smart guys,
yeah. Well, we'll have to start. Well, we'll talk about it some more.
Yeah.
At this point, we don't necessarily agree, but maybe we'll get there. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, no.
But what that means is you're gonna agree with me, basically.
Oh wow, you're gonna debate me into the ground, man.
Basically, yeah. Good luck with that.
We'll see about that, mother. Hey, I debated you on the James Gunn topic. You conceded that shit like quickly when we had the podcast about it.
Well, okay, I'll have to go back and look. But yeah, I think. Yes, I think.
I'm just trying to trigger you. I'm just kidding.
That's not it. Getting me all worked up, man. Come on.
No, that's okay. No, we've good intellectual give and take. This is good. All right. So now, of course, Thanos is in the present day. Thanos is, elaborates on his plan, and basically Thanos, starts fighting the Avengers. So of course Thor gets the God mode back because he got his balls back. Essentially, he is able to even though he's still fat, he has the lightning strike him, gets a braided beard, and yeah, start fighting, and essentially Thanos is almost like unstoppable. But I think one of the most beautiful emotional payoffs of the entire movie is the fact that we get this bit in Avengers Age of Ultron where after their first fight taking out Stryker's base, Captain America is able to budge Thor's hammer a tiny, tiny bit, and that kind of plants the seed in 2015 that one day maybe Captain America will be able to wield Mjolnir and be like pure of heart enough and worthy enough to actually wield it. The fact that we see Captain America wielding Mjolnir in this movie was absolutely absurd. Like like I usually hate clapping in movies, but I literally couldn't help it. Like I had to clap at that part because that was such a gratifying moment to see. Like it was
completely well earned.
Yeah.
And actually, some of the fan theories that were coming up around that time, Ultron, was that Captain America knew he was worthy, but he basically held back. He knew
Yeah.
he could have lifted it, and then he basically held back and didn't lift it. But he budged it a little bit. So the idea was so. I mean, I don't think I think if you didn't know that fan theory, you still would have appreciated this moment because you as the audience viewing it at that moment saw that he was worthy, and this didn't really catch you by surprise. Just pleasant surprise, but not like, oh my god, this is completely wrong.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
something like that.
yeah, exactly. And also, I mean, in the comics, I'm not too woke on Captain America comics, but I do know that there are some iterations where basically it's a similar thing where in the heat of trouble, essentially, Captain America is able to wield Mjolnir.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, that is a canonical thing.
Yeah, exactly. But here, it's just so gratifying to see because, I mean, it's a seed that was planted so subtly so long ago that like, again, like there are so many things that the Russo brothers capitalized on that I do not think that Joss Whedon and all the other people who made the movies and produced them really knew the emotional payoff those little tiny moments had. Like they spent a lot of time in that script, man. Like they had to have spent like months to years writing that.
Yeah, they say a couple of years in total. So
Yeah. Like
and
like
this is before they even did any actual. It's part of the pre-production. They had multiple meetings with their writers. They had all these characters written out, all these character arcs. You had the entire repository of movies to be inspired from. So what is it that I pay off? What have you already established that I can't really retcon? If there's something that I can retcon, what do I retcon? And the nice thing is they didn't have any logistical barriers, meaning like say if they had an actor who was completely unwilling to come back to it, they didn't
Natalie
have those
Portman,
kind
for
of.
example.
Yeah, Natalie Portman. I mean, I don't know if she was on set physically
She
to
was the
film
only
her
one.
scenes,
Yeah.
but they had footage of her, so they could have used it anyway. So basically, they had all the resources to tell the stories that they could tell, but then you have to be inspired by things that you yourself were not responsible for. By the time Avengers and Age of Ultron Avengers was coming out, the Russo brothers were not part of the MCU, but they're like, okay, all these, there were 22 movies total. They did four of them. The other 18 were done by other people that they had to draw from what those other people did on those 18 movies and capitalize on the most important things. And this is one of them.
Yeah, for sure. Um, Honestly, like they give every single character emotional significance and weight, and they did it not only in their own original story, but they also just they they reintroduced and remotivated so many different character elements from other movies.
Yeah.
It's really like I said, it really is absolutely jaw dropping what they were able to accomplish with this movie. Like it really was. But anyway, so after the whole
And
fight,
everybody had their heroic
yeah,
their moment to
even
shine.
even
So
fucking Black Panther, who was barely in the movie, he had emotional finality and finesse and like power to his role. Like seeing him, Spider Man, and the Guardians of the Galaxy walk through those portals in the Avengers Assemble
yeah,
scene, that was one of the most satisfying experiences in a movie theater I've probably ever seen.
I agree. It was
Like
the most wonderful thing I've ever seen. Yes.
honestly, like seeing like the slight golden halo materialize, then Black Panther walks through, then the Guardians, then Doctor Strange, and Spider-Man, and then like honestly, that was one of the best sequences that I've probably ever seen in the film. Like like I cannot think of a better way that they possibly could have done that. Like
And no, and they actually the way they actually set that up was, so it's all about, so when you do storytelling, you have, especially when you have a big battle, like it was important to keep it small at the beginning. So you had the three main guys, Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor, fighting against Thanos. Thanos won that fight, even though Captain America was able to wield the Mjolnir. Thanos is still superior in the sense that what whatever. So Thanos has access to technology that makes him basically invincible. He has
yeah,
his armor, and whatever sword he was using was stronger than vibranium. It broke Captain America's shield.
yeah,
So you can have a character recently becoming OP like Captain America being able to wield Mjolnir, but it's still not enough to stop Thanos. And so it's all about you have the initial advantage. You had 3 versus 1. Thor had both the hammer
Stormbreaker.
and Stormbreaker. Couldn't defeat Thanos. Iron Man with all of his tricks couldn't defeat Thanos. Captain America wielding Mjolnir couldn't defeat Thanos. And then Thanos shows up with this big army that was waiting in his spaceship. So you basically start feeling some type of despair that you're gonna lose the battle. And so the tide turns, and the way they set that up was Sam Wilson, who's Captain America's closest friend besides Bucky Barnes, says, "Captain, do you read on your left?" And the on your left is a reference from Winter Soldier. So, and then you see the portal opening finally, and that's when the tide turns, and all of the emotional payoff from the climax is realized, and you as the audience cannot help but be immensely satisfied by it.
Yeah, so satisfying. Like even Pepper Potts had an Iron Man suit on.
Pepper Potts. So yeah, that's something they set up in this movie, and it paid off. Say, you know, in Iron Man 3, she did have
the suit
some
on.
sort of a suit. She did have superpowers of her own with Extremis, even though like she was technically cured of it.
Yeah, she was cured of it. Yeah,
she still is capable of being a warrior, and she was in this movie.
Yeah, that was awesome. But yeah, and then the rest of the movie kind of just follows suit, and you know, obviously there's the encounter between Tony Stark and Doctor Strange, who of course, like, you know, the entire film is essentially centered on the fact that Strange knows something that we do not in the end of Infinity War.
Yeah, right.
And so,
well, before we get there, just to not skip over this, like I said, it's important for everyone to have their so you know, well, part of it is the audience needs to be reminded, like you have to have some amount of exposition. Spider-Man is the one who does the exposition. He says, "Hey, Mr. Stark, do you remember when we were on that planet and I basically passed out, and then I woke up again, and Doctor Strange was like, oh, 5 years has gone by and we came back," or whatever. Like, we needed to understand what happened to those characters who were snapped back. Like, how did they? What did they go through? You know, were they aware of the passage of time? Were they in the Soul Stone? It seems like they were just unconscious, like they didn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And suddenly they existed back with all of their memories and everything. So that was important for us to know, and it was important that it was Spider-Man conveying that to Iron Man, and then they finally hugged.
Yeah.
Because that was the payoff to Tony Stark missing him the entire movie. And at the same time, it was the first time he properly hugged him, because in Spider-Man Homecoming, he gave him like a half-ass hug.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
He was like, okay, I'm not hugging you. I'm just opening the door for you. But so that moment was important. All of these characters showing up in their ways was important, and then they needed to get the gauntlet basically to Tony Stark's hands eventually. The people who carried that gauntlet and all the stuff they went through was important.
Yeah.
And then there was a moment which we basically had all of the female Avengers,
which was awesome. Yeah.
Which was a very awesome moment, and it's very well, and probably planting the seeds for a female Avengers movie in the future. We'll see.
Exactly.
Captain Marvel had to come back. She got her own heroic moment because
part on the ship. Yeah.
The ship started firing at her. We don't know who was coming. It was like something entered the atmosphere. At that moment, you knew it was her.
Yeah.
And then she basically blows up the ship and stuff. That's a physical payoff to her abilities as a fighter, right?
Exactly.
And then there was one more. I can't think of it right now, but yeah, the Pepper Potts thing. I think there was a couple of those important moments that I can't really think of off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But basically gets to the point where you have the showdown between... Oh, I'm sorry. Scarlet Witch. So Scarlet Witch came back. She's the one that, there were two... Before this moment, there were two permanent deaths, which is Natasha and Vision. Vision never came back. So she had to make Thanos come correct to whatever he did to her. So it was her utilizing her powers to basically strip him of his armor that made him finally finally vanquishable. And that was an important moment before we get to what Tony Stark is doing.
Yeah, exactly. So, obviously, so Tony Stark sees Doctor Strange again. And of course, like we said, the inciting incident for this thing is Doctor Strange knows something that we do not as an audience member. So, of course, he knows how it's going to play out. And, so far, of course, they're going on the path where it's the one way where they win. Tony Stark asks him, hey, all the 14 million ways you saw, is this the correct one? And Doctor Strange says, if I tell you, it's not going to happen. And that's very, very important because at the end of the movie, of course, it's a self-sacrificing thing. Now, the question is, do you think Tony Stark realized he had to die? Like, do you think, he knew that basically he was going to be one to get the gauntlet off of Thanos to get the Infinity Stones? Or do you think it was because Strange purposefully withheld information and said, like, if you know you're going to die, you're not going to do it?
I think he knew. And it was important that he had to choose to.
Exactly. So that's what I think. It's like,
because if you tell him and he still does it, is it a choice really? No, not really.
No. Yeah.
It's an order that you followed. So it's important for that. It was his destiny, and for me, like, I see destiny. You sort of have to choose your own destiny, right? So he makes the choice to do the sacrifice willingly and not through any sort of coercion. It was through his own will.
Yeah, exactly.
That's important.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, so afterwards, I mean, of course, like, his body is completely decimated by, what he did, and he snapped. The performance of Gwyneth Paltrow there was really beautiful. Like, because, like, so she went down on one knee and she, like, talked to Friday, like, their AI bot, and, like, of course, said, like, life systems, like, at, critical mass or whatever the fuck she said. Like, it was apparent that he was going to die. And so instead of breaking down and saying, I love you, please don't go, she kind of like capitalized on that theme of everything's going to be fine, you can rest now. And, like, that was very important because in the first instance of them talking about the eventuality of maybe him, like, dying for doing this, she said, like, you're never going to be able to rest. And then in this, of course, she actually, encourages him to rest because he finally was able to do what he set out to do and save the world. And then, of course, when he's gone, she's completely devastated, and she was able to, stop the smiles and, like, the encouragement, and then really kind of bare her soul, which, like, honestly, like, that was just superb acting from Gwyneth Paltrow there. And I haven't really seen her do too much of that, like, very, very subtle acting, but to see her do that in, like, the final moment of that film was fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. And Peter Parker, along with that Peter moment Parker, as well.
Yeah, War Machine.
So all of the important characters were there. It was a very emotional scene, and they had to pull it off. What I really like is there's a very symbolic thing, which is the moment that we realize he expired, to use a technical term. We didn't see life leave his eyes. We saw his arc reactor turn off. And I think that was a very important thing because that had defined him the entire time. Tony Stark is defined by his arc reactor. And to choose to show his death in that way, I thought was very powerful choice to have made.
Yeah.
And then you back up, you see his eyes. He's gone.
Yeah. And it's kind of... it's a callback to the first movie because, of course, like, when the shock happens on the roof of Iron Man 1, you see his arc reactor dim because he just got shocked by an electromagnetic pulse. And then you see it kind of slowly flicker on and it fades out, and then he's still alive. And here it's kind of the weird, almost, the mirror image of that, where basically you see it illuminate and then it just slowly goes dark, which is,
right.
Yeah.
And also... and that's confirmation. There is no ambiguity.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I just really loved how, like, it was a callback to every single movie of the MCU. Of course, the big one is I Am Iron Man, and, like, legit, Iron Man. Yeah, exactly. And it's not even poised like in an arrogant way. Like, it's a response to the fact that Thanos is, so arrogant that he believes he's a god, and a man who made his own superpowers is the one that stops you. A man that built something to save his own life is the one that stops you. It's almost like a new myth in a way, where, like, obviously the whole myth of a superhero is somebody who's like a mild-mannered person that gets bit by a spider or gets powers through whatever way, or like some tragedy happens. I've never really seen somebody who has to build something to save their own life, and that leads them on the path of being a hero. It was a really beautiful final chapter of Tony Stark's life, and the last funeral scene I think was again one of the most brilliant things ever, because they go like internally in your mind they go through every single phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and you see
okay, yeah, right.
yeah, because think about it, it's like the camera pans and you see almost chronologically every single film and every single character arc that's been set up in the entire franchise, and then you realize that by showing them all giving Tony Stark a send off, every single life that he's touched in these movies is present to see him, finally be able to rest after being able to finally move on with his life, and of course that's in death. But yeah, and then of course, like at the end of it, when you go back more chronologically, you see Black Panther, and the thing that was really awesome was you see the kid from Iron Man 3 in the back.
Yeah, that kid, you're right.
That was like God. Like they how did they get so many actors in the same place for that movie? Like God.
It was very important for him to be there. I was actually touched. I'm like, that's very good attention to detail, because Tony Stark changed that kid's life. The kid was being bullied. You could have imagined in a situation where Tony Stark did not come into his life, he could have grown up as a depressed teenager. Maybe he could have committed suicide because he didn't have, a family figure, right?
Yeah.
And he was bullied. He didn't really have anything going for him. Tony Stark saves him. He saved Tony Stark first.
Yeah.
Tony Stark saves him in return and fundamentally alters the course of his life. You don't even, and it's one of those things where you have earned the right to not even have to spend any more time lingering on his face or even explaining why he's there. You just see him and you understand.
Exactly.
You get it. You get it.
Yeah, and then of course, I mean, the last person that you see is the person that started it all, Nick Fury, who's like looking over.
That's the first time we see him.
Yeah, first time you see him, and honestly, like at first I was disappointed. Like, oh, I kind of wanted him to have like a send off speech. It doesn't matter. You don't need that. Like, just the fact that he's present, looking on, and is there, to see the bookend of what he himself created. That's enough. Like, you don't need like exposition saying like, what's it called? You don't need some overly expositional thing where it's like, there was an idea where we would do this and have the people, come together because we need them and stuff. You don't need that heavy-handed stuff in that moment. All you need is him just to be there looking, satisfied and longing towards the people that he basically had to come together and, save the world. Because it's like he said, we needed them. And then, of course, at this point, we don't need Tony Stark anymore. He's done enough and he's able to rest, which, God, that was like, I was bawling like a bitch. Oh man, that was just absolutely brilliant filmmaking.
Yeah. Proof that Tony Stark has a heart.
Yeah. My God.
Yeah. And I think that's the important thing, because when Thanos was about to kill him back in Infinity War, he says, Tony Stark, you have my respect. I hope everybody remembers you.
And of course they do.
You can see how many lives he's impacted. Everybody who meant anything to him, to this universe, was there. So, it wasn't a similar thing to like what the Dark Knight Rises did, where they had a scene where Batman had a statue, they unveiled it in front of the entire city and stuff like that. I don't think Tony Stark needed that.
No.
His funeral was a lot more personal. But that made it even more relevant. It was more of an emotional thing that they kept it small, and the team that was very relevant, as opposed to a bigger crowd that he did not necessarily personally impact. But we know that as people that he has personally impacted all of them.
Yeah.
The entire Earth, the entire universe.
Yeah, exactly. And then that wraps up really beautifully. And the scene that really broke me was when Happy was talking to his daughter, and like, I love you 3000. Like, your dad liked burgers. Like one of my friends, Bailey from Loveboy Media, he had a tweet and saying, Burger King employees are going to be really confused, and people start crying when they order cheeseburgers now. Oh man. But and then so finally, I mean, the last kind of character arc they have is Captain America. Who basically. This, I think, was just a really, God, like just a beautiful send-off for him, because, he's a person who's, like you said, he's stuck out of time. He doesn't really have a place here anymore. And his entire life has been war and fighting and, like, being a patriot. And once this entire arc is done, he realized that I don't have to fight anymore and I can actually focus on my own happiness. And the only way to do that is, now that he has time travel abilities, he goes back and he's content with being with the love of his life. And
And he lives his purposeful life.
exactly, like he creates a new purpose. Like he's accepted what's happened to him, and then he creates his own purpose as a result. And yeah, having the movie, having the final shot be that dance scene, I thought it was gonna be something like really like heavy handed, like overlooking a sunset or something like that. But the fact that the final shot is them dancing, like, and he finally got the send off that he wanted, just very, very clever way of ending that movie. Like,
Absolutely. And it
yeah,
was the ending he deserves.
yeah,
Well done, man. It's just a well done movie.
yeah,
Everything. Great ideas, great execution on those ideas.
yeah. Like and like, as sad as I am with the movie, I'm kind of somber and kind of sad because this has been something that, like, I mean, you and I've talked about these movies for hours and hours and hours. We tabulate it. Like when we were in lab together, I'm pretty sure when we were both running columns one day, we were just gushing about like what was going to happen in Infinity War because we hadn't seen it yet. So like, yeah, man, like the fact that this is the bookend of this universe, it's kind of like, I guess the question is like, where do we go from here? And of course, like, we're going to have the streaming service shows. We're going to have, like, I guess maybe at this point probably smaller movies in terms of like kinds of movies we're going to see on the screen, because it's very unlikely they're going to pull something off as daring as they did for the next 11 years. So
Yeah, and I don't think they will even try it. Or I don't think anybody will even try, because it's sort of an exercise in futility.
yeah,
Yes, DC can put together something equally epic. And sure, Marvel can put something equally epic in different duration. There's nothing else that can really compare to what happened here. So, but no, having said that, they do have new ways of storytelling. They have, Disney has their own streaming service now, which means you can incorporate canonical MCU elements within TV, and that had always been a debate whether the elements of the MCU that we had seen in TV were canonical, because we have the street level heroes, the defenders. They were never officially referenced in the movie, so they were not canonical to the movies themselves.
yeah,
But then you had these ancillary shows like uh, Agents of Shield and Agent Carter, which were referenced in these movies. Because I think when they go back to 1970, there was this character Jarvis, the butler,
mm-hmm.
and that was a character who originated from the Agent Carter TV show. So having him on that movie and basically having him set of Agent Carter makes that show relevant and canonical to the movies.
Yeah,
But now they have the streaming service, and before this movie came out, we knew that there was going to be a Key show, and we knew that there was going to be a Bucky Barnes and Sam Wilson show. The movie actually gives meaning to what those shows would be, and we can use that as a way to get into the whole, what are the mechanics of time travel that they did, and what are the sort of ramifications.
yeah,
Because in this movie, before they were time traveling, they purposefully took the time to explain exactly what the rules were, and more specifically, they ruled out what the rules were not. So they said, this is not
Back to the Future. Yeah,
Back to the Future, this is not Terminator. Because logically, in those shows, if you go back in time and you affect something that happens in the present, it will be reflected into your future timeline.
yeah,
In this case, they follow what I call the Dragon Ball Z Trunks time travel rules, which is nothing you do in the past will affect your own timeline. You can only create new timelines that bifurcate from yours from the moment where you travel back in time.
yeah,
So specifically to this movie, for example, one of the rules is there are as many timelines as there are instances of time travel.
yeah,
So when the Avengers time traveled to New York, we saw that the plan to get the space stone was not successful because Loki grabbed it and disappeared.
Yeah.
So that created a new timeline. You have a new timeline that we didn't experience as an audience
Exactly.
because we experienced the timeline that we saw. But that created a new timeline where the Loki who was defeated in the attack of New York survived, and he went off doing to
God
God
knows
knows
what. Yeah.
where, doing God knows what. So there's going to be a streaming show, presumably to discuss what
What
happened to
happened? Yeah.
that version of Loki. Then the other thing that they did, they went back in time to Asgard 2013. Thor steals Mjolnir in that timeline. So you created a timeline where that version of Thor did not have Mjolnir because it was stolen from him. At that time, he was under attack from these dark elves, right? What does he do in the absence of a hammer? Presumably, the dark elves probably either kill him or at least decimate
Asgard.
the
Yeah.
entire Asgard. They kill Odin himself. So you created a timeline where maybe the dark won, and that would have plunged that universe into darkness if they had
Yeah.
won. Um, and then 2014 when they go back to Morag and they defeat Quill. Basically, by doing that, you created a timeline where the Guardians of the Galaxy do not exist because
Exactly.
there is no other way for them to come together. So where do we go from here? We have these TV shows that can tell the story about all of the timelines that the Avengers created over the course of this movie that we do not get to see in the movie. You can do that, and at the conclusion of this movie, the mantle of Captain America has passed to Falcon. So
Yeah.
if you have a Bucky Barnes and Falcon TV show, it is presumably a show about
The new Captain
them
America.
being
Yeah.
Captain America. So, but it's a TV show. It's not a movie. More real estate, and the storytelling techniques will be a little different. But then now you have a universe where just in the real world you've acquired, the Fox characters, you've acquired the X-Men, you've
Yeah.
acquired the Fantastic Four, you've acquired other ancillary characters that you couldn't use in your universe. For example, legally, Wanda Maximoff, who is known as Scarlet Witch in the comics, Scarlet Witch is technically a mutant. So
Yeah.
officially, Marvel could not call her Scarlet Witch, which is why you've never heard her being called Scarlet Witch.
Yeah.
But now that you have the right to call her Scarlet Witch, maybe you do that. Maybe you embrace her mutant origins. She's the daughter of Magneto. So do you incorporate Magneto now in your universe? Because, well, it's too late now. You can't incorporate him that way. But now that you have the X-Men, you have stories that you can tell where the X-Men and the Avengers cross over.
Yeah.
Or presumably, when Thanos snapped his fingers, one of the ramifications is he created mutants. That's one way to do it. One way to sort of reset your universe and make it bigger in that way.
Exactly. Yeah, that'd be a clever way to do it. Yeah, like that was always one thing that kind of bugged me about those movies is so Wanda obviously in comic lore is the the mutant daughter of Magneto. But in Age of Ultron, essentially they write her off as just getting her powers from the Mind Stone, basically experiments from Stryker and stuff. That always kind of bugged me.
But Baron von Strucker.
Strucker, yeah, that's Stryker. Sorry. Yeah, like that always kind of confused me because like you're kind of erasing a very vital part of that character's biography for the sake of you basically. I mean, it worked out well because basically like that also gave them again a really brilliant character switch, like the fact that her power came from the Mind Stone and they were able to actually destroy one of the Infinity Stones. Of course, Thanos got it. Now, of course, he used the Time Stone, gets it back, but yeah, like those changes didn't really bother me too much. I mean, they but now
Captain Marvel also, like her origin story was retconned in favor of the logic that they had already established. She gets her powers from the Tesseract, which is now what happens in the comics as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And so like that's the thing. It's like as long as those changes actually make sense in whatever context you're telling, I'm totally fine with it.
Right. Yes.
But yeah, like but again, like you said, there are a lot of eventualities they can actually go down now with the fact that they not only have massive amounts of characters, but because they introduced the abstract concept of time travel and universe jumping, essentially they're able to do whatever they want. Now, I'm kind of concerned a little bit because stories that try to have continuity in multiple universes and multiple timelines usually end up pretty convoluted. Like Kingdom Hearts, for example, is one of the stories where like they could do with not having 55 different timelines and stuff. So
Or even the Flash, which has different rules for time travel as well.
yeah,
Pretty complicated, pretty quickly.
yeah, exactly. So that's the thing that I'm kind of worried about like going forward. If we're gonna talk quickly about like what's gonna happen in the future, but essentially like I don't know, like the whole point of the Marvel Cinematic Universe was to have you know like I read my video essay, it's a multi-issue graphic novel brought about by the continuity of filmmaking is basically what it is. And so to have an element of that really is not, I mean, there's continuity, but it's not clear as to like basically the elements in which they're connected as. And so if we bring in a bunch of different universes and a bunch of different, eventualities and timelines and all that stuff, I think it's going to take away an aspect of Marvel that's really been, really fruitful in them kind of establishing themselves as this force of basically filmmaking continuity. I'm just curious, what do you think is going to happen once they start messing with like different timelines and eventualities and stuff? Like, do you think it's going to be nearly as impactful as what we've seen, or do you think it's going to
It
be?
would be. I don't think it will be on a massive scale the way you anticipate. So I feel like something like that in terms of uh, basically a reckoning with timeline manipulations. That
Yeah,
could be a Doctor Strange movie because the Ancient One did say that it is important for all of the Infinity Stones to be present within the same continuity. Otherwise, you create this new bifurcating. Well, she called it a reality. It was a different reality, and it was dark. So imagine if any character that we already know who could deal with the consequences of even removing one of the Infinity Stones for a time, even though yes you returned it, but the fact that you mess with them in that way deals is it messes up the fabric of reality. So that is something that Doctor Strange can deal with in his own movie. It
yeah,
doesn't have to be an Avengers project necessarily.
sure.
So, but then there's also the possibility of doing it through the Avengers because one character they did not have access to before the Fox merger, now they do, is a character called the King the Conqueror.
Yeah, can conquer. Yep.
King is a character known for basically being able to control time. So he's basically a time traveling person himself. You can write him as sort of the guardian of the timeline, and he notices all of these ways you've messed up timelines and realities, and he would be the one coming in to basically destroy the Avengers
Yeah,
as a way to prevent anything like that from happening again. And he's the type of villain who has the type of power that the Avengers have to deal with. You can't just have Doctor Strange deal with him on his own. So you can have those types of stories where you don't have to have an entire phase to set that up, but you just have one movie where all these Avengers have to come back again and deal with it. And then clearly, what a lot of people are anticipating, you have access to the Fox characters, you bring in Galactus as your next Thanos.
yeah.
Somebody on that scale. But then again, you can't just bring him in one movie to do the storytelling and the
You tease it.
groundwork.
Yeah,
You have to tease him, do the groundwork where at some point he comes in and claims the Earth for himself, basically. So they have a lot of options, and I'm sure they do them correctly.
yeah, for sure.
At the
Uh,
same time, Sony was building their own universe themselves. You have Into the Spider Verse, which introduced the notion of the multiverse within the Spider-Man universe. You
yeah,
can imagine they can try to translate that into live action, and that could be something that Marvel produces and Sony distributes. That's the way that they're doing with the current Spider-Man movies.
yeah,
So, like you bring in Venom and stuff like that into the MCU that way. Those are also options as well. So
yeah,
they have a
exactly.
lot of options, and I'm just excited and waiting to see what they actually end up doing.
Yeah, me too. Um, I don't think we've talked about this. What did you think about Into the Spider Verse? Now that we're on the subject,
I thought it was a very good movie.
I loved it. I thought it
Very
was
well done.
yeah,
I mean, I was familiar with Miles Morales briefly from the comics. Again, fairly recent character as well. I think some of the seminal comics about him came out in the 2010s, like in the early
Yeah,
2010s,
exactly.
and they did his origin story very well here, while taking the time to establish the importance of Peter Parker. So I like the fact that they did not deviate from Peter Parker as the quintessential Spider-Man, but then you bring
Exactly.
in all these other people, they're sort of supporting characters to him, but now you've established Miles Morales, so you're excited to see what else he brings into the table. And it's a good story about representation too. He's a black and Latino youth, in New York. So there are storytelling elements there that maybe the current iteration of Peter Parker shows, but um, like for example, the Sam Raimi movies didn't really show that gritty aspect of New York life in that way. So
Exactly.
I'm excited for what they have to do in the future.
Yeah, me too. I thought Into the Spider Verse was one of the first movies that actually took risks in terms of being an animated movie. Like,
Yes, it has like five different animation styles that meshed into one. You have like the
yeah,
the Pixar type characters. You have the Japanese character who's like an anime drawn
yeah,
style. You have this noir guy who's drawn as a noir character,
yeah,
and mixing all of that, it was pretty brilliant. I thought,
yeah. I loved it.
and it
I
looks
thought it was
like a
genius.
comic book. It
What
looks like the pages
it
of a comic book.
and like I love like every single action they do. Like this little like split second of like blam or like pow. Like when someone punches somebody, like a split second, and it just like it happens like for an instant, and like even if you blink, you miss it. But like it just adds a layer of complexity to that movie that's just incredible. That's kind of a huge aside. But yeah, man, with Endgame, they gave a really beautiful send off. I want to see it at least one more time while it's still in theaters. I want to see it in IMAX because I like with a movie like that where the and also this is the final point here. Essentially, this movie was massive in terms of scale. No one could take that away from the movie. The movie was just like probably the biggest movie I've ever seen in my entire life in terms of just like the sheer audacity it took. But there are so many small character moments that actually motivate all of those like bombastic scenes. Like I've never seen a blockbuster like this that is so grand in terms of scale and also just so personal because like they're able to motivate all of the character arcs in this, but they're also able to tell a really fulfilling and satisfying, big budget blockbuster. It just goes to the fact the Russo brothers really know how to craft the script. They
Yes.
like God, like how they did some of the stuff they did in that movie. I will have no idea. Like the sheer creativity, it deserves an immense amount of respect from people.
Yes, and actually that's something I wanted to bring up is what do you think about this movie in terms of legacy? Uh, Obviously, the legacy is being written as we speak. It demolished all sorts of box office records. We have yet to see how it'll perform with regards to like Oscars and all these kind of awards. I hope what did happen to Harry Potter won't happen to this one, where in Harry Potter you would have hoped that they use the last movie as a way to a sort of a lifetime achievement type of thing where they start rewarding all these people for what they have accomplished and they didn't. Never got any nominations for acting, never really had any serious consideration for Best Picture and all that at the Oscars.
Yeah,
So, I mean, I think best case scenario, now that Black Panther sort of broke the seal of having superhero movies being legitimized to the
yeah,
point where they can be nominated for Oscars, I think hopefully this movie capitalizes on that. But I think just in terms of legacy, I really hope that our and future audiences just realize how historic this moment is in terms of movie making on that scale, and basically, like one of the highest sort of acclaim that a movie can have is to be included in like the Library of Congress and being immortalized in that way, being included in like the Sight and Sound best movies of all time type of thing.
yeah.
Do you think this movie would achieve that kind of status on its own, like fairly soon, or would it take a longer amount of time?
Well, I mean, my answer gonna be a little bit bifurcated there. So one, I think yes, I think that it's going to reach like unprecedented heights where it literally is going to become iconic in and of itself for sure. Now, in terms of when that happens, it depends on the audience that's watching it. For the people that love Marvel, it's instantaneous for us. Like we know
Right.
how big and how massive and how important this movie is for cinema at large and really just Marvel. For people that are more snide or maybe are not big fans of comic books or just Marvel movies in particular, I think that once the entire Infinity Saga is released and is basically like you can actually look at the story from a bird's eye perspective, then the people that are kind of more, I guess, traditional with films will probably start to appreciate it. But that's why I
Yeah,
said it.
like the Steven Spielberg of the world.
Yeah, like,
You know.
and also like he's a douche, man. Like he he was talking about like how like if you make a movie on Netflix, like you
Yeah,
don't
Netflix. Yeah.
like you don't deserve like Oscars. And I'm like, Roma in fucking 2018 was one of the most beautiful films I've ever seen in my entire life, and that was it's not because he was like trying to like go for like a cheap throw or something like that. Alfonso Cuarón wanted to make a movie like he wanted to make it, and he released it in a place where he knows the most amount of people are going to watch it. Like,
Right.
he's an auteur director, didn't really care about the box office, didn't really care about any of that kind of stuff. And like, yeah, like it was very snide the way those people come off, where it's like, just because a movie's released in a certain medium or released in a certain way, then it discounts it from like legitimacy. I just disagree. I think that the quality of the film, the audacity it took to make it is the most important part. So to go on your point, I think that even if people, like I said, even if people don't like Marvel, they're going to realize that this whole achievement that the Russo brothers have done here, this demands an immense amount of respect, even if you hate those movies. Like this, like this solidifies them as like legitimate like artists. Like
Yes.
and it's odd because like people say that these things required no thought at all. This movie required so much planning and so much creativity and so much heart. Like even again, even hate the movies, you can't take that away from them. So I think to answer your question, for the people who are aware that superhero movies are more than just like quippy action scenes and like big set pieces, I think the people are going to recognize it pretty recently. Like this is a once in a lifetime film that we've just seen. And like I'm so grateful and thankful that I saw this in my youth, because like I'm able to grow up now and I can tell my kids about this entire this entire saga that I was able to witness from the first movie. Like I saw Iron Man 1 opening day for my birthday in 2008. Like I was in the theater like seeing that, and like the fact that we're able to look at this thing through rose-colored glasses and from a bird's eye perspective, it's just like it really is incalculable how much of a legacy everybody in these movies is kind of like made for themselves. I think it's going to be longer before people actually realize it, that aren't aware of it at this certain moment, but I think it's pretty apparent that it's going to happen. Like they've made their place in cinema as a landmark achievement, and
Yeah. Yeah.
you can't take it away from them.
Right. To go back to on Steven Spielberg, Netflix. The easiest way to sort of legitimize Netflix is to bring in like so. For example, what's his name? The director, Scorsese,
Yeah,
is doing a Netflix movie this year. He has a lot of gravitas. He's a pretty big name in cinema, so
one of the best. Yeah,
you can imagine he will bring a lot of credibility to the whole Netflix enterprise. Um, Maybe what it would, I think, I believe at this point the superhero genre has been legitimized. We have had some authors attack it, like Chris Nolan and whatnot. I
yeah,
do believe, well, if in the case that the genre still is not legitimized in that way, maybe you can have bigger direct. We have big actors coming in, Oscar-winning people like Kate Blanchett, you know, Brie Larson herself is an Oscar-winning
yeah,
woman. It seems like in the future, somebody like Angelina Jolie, Eternals movies that Marvel is making in the future. So on the acting point of view, I think it's legitimized enough that these big people are doing
for
it. But
sure.
then you have, will it take having Scorsese or Spielberg directing one of these movies? And I heard like they're both looking into working with DC to direct some type of movies, but until maybe until then, it may not be legitimate from that perspective, where you have these big time directors doing those movies.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
like me, I go on Wikipedia, I see. I look up some of the biggest box office successes of all time. I look at a movie like Jaws. I look at a movie like Star Wars, Raiders of the Lost Ark. I look at their Wikipedia page and I saw when these movies came out, it made this much money. It was nominated for 10 Oscars. It won 5 Oscars. They may not have won Best Picture, but they were nominated at least.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily, like, if I were born 10 years into the future and I start looking back 10, 20 years in the past, and I see all these movies that are so well respected, made all this money, but then didn't have the awards legitimacy there. I feel like something is missing. Like, what was wrong with the critics? And it's not the critics' fault. The critics are liking this movie. The audiences are liking this movie,
Yeah.
but they're just not getting Oscars that way. So I hope that basically Black Panther was just the movie that broke the seal, and that this genre will be recognized in that way, getting Oscars, getting awards, and basically being legitimate in the minds of people. Our kids growing up. It would be
Yeah.
the Star Wars to what is Star Wars for us may be the Avengers for them in the future.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more because, like, I mean, but I'm gonna be honest with you. After the shit show that was the Oscars this last year with some of the people that won awards, I don't know if I take the Oscars that seriously anymore. Like the fact that Bohemian Rhapsody was a sincere frontrunner for Best Picture really upsets me. Really, really. Did you see that movie, by the way?
No, I haven't, but I can. I just haven't had
It's
yeah.
no. Like, it is the most puff piece by the books. Like, it feels like an HBO original movie, basically. And like, I'm not saying that they're bad movies. I like a lot of HBO ones, like All the Way with Bryan Cranston as LBJ is a great movie. The movie is legitimately bad, and people like it because it's like nostalgia fuel, and like there's a lot of callbacks to Queen and all that kind of shit. The editing in that movie, like, it won Best Editing. The editing is legitimately incomprehensible.
Usually, those awards and sound these effects and sound mixing, those are pretty biased towards musicals in general.
Well,
But
no, oh,
I
for
think that's
sure,
what it was.
and that's why I said, like, I did a solo stream after the Oscars because I was so pissed about it. Like, I did a stream by myself like an hour or so, and so, like, legitimately, my I had 2 points about that. Number one was the only reason why that won Best Editing is because some of the scenes were cut to the music. Where basically, like, they have, like, a Queen song, and basically every match cut is like set to the beat of the music and stuff. That's one of the reasons why I think
Kind
it
of like
won.
what Edgar Wright does, sort of thing.
A shittier version of that because it's literally just a live
Okay.
version of the song. It's like, he choreographs beats of like car doors closing to like songs. Like that takes
Right,
credit,
right.
and that takes like actual like creativity. The other thing I said about Bohemian Rhapsody was, so the movie legitimately is incomprehensible because they're at a dinner scene, for example. Within 5 seconds, the camera has cut to a close up of every single member of the band, the person talking, the waiter, back to Freddie Mercury, another person in the band, and then that goes to the whole table. It's like a seizure happening in front of your eyes. And so I had a tweet where I was like, of course, Bohemian Rhapsody won Best Editing. It's the true story of how the editor did cocaine, Adderall, and caffeine and locked himself in a room and tried out Final Cut Pro for the first time. Because,
Maybe that's what happened. Actually, who knows?
like, because that editing, man, it's just, whew, like, it's incomprehensible. And also, I was kind of pissed that Infinity War didn't win special effects. That kind of pissed me off.
So the last time a legitimate blockbuster won that award was Inception 10 years ago. So they just have a. I feel like there was just a bias, like where the people responsible for giving awards just were not watching these movies. They'll nominate them because the artistry deserves it, but they wouldn't give it to them because, like, for example, I don't remember when Ex Machina came out. Ex Machina won over like some type of. I think it might have been 2014, but
Yeah, 2014.
2014 it was like Guardians of the Galaxy, X Men: Days of Future Past, Captain America, Winter Soldier came out that year. All these legitimate, and I think one of the good Planet of the Apes came out as well.
Yeah.
All these legitimately great movies in terms of their visual effects just passed over into to Ex Machina, which was a lot smaller in terms of the scope of their visual effects. But they gave it to it because they were like, "Oh, this is a legit movie. We're not gonna blockbusters."
Yeah,
So that's the issue that I have with the Oscars in general. But
yeah, for sure. I will say the visual effects of Ex Machina. If you look at the behind the scenes of that movie, there's a lot of unseen special effects that are like pretty impeccable. And also like Ava as a character is pretty well realized, and like there's a lot of editing that had to be done to make her look like a robot. But I will say, Andy Serkis's work on any of the Planet of the Apes movies is actually jaw dropping. And
Andy Serkis has been passed over for a long time.
yeah,
And I think part of it is people didn't really understand that it was him really acting in
yeah,
there, As I think he should have won for the Two Towers in the Lord of the Rings. I
me
feel
too.
like that work was sensational. It was the best acting that year
Yeah,
by
for
anyone.
sure. Yeah.
So anyway,
Anyway, the fucking Oscars, man.
yeah, Oscars is a different beast, but
It is.
maybe this movie doesn't need to be legitimized. But I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's important because that is the highest acclaim you can have as a film is to get Oscars because that's the biggest award you can win. Um, I just hope that they meaning Oscar voters, just have the integrity. It's an integrity thing to actually watch this movie and judge it appropriately for what it is, as opposed to basically condescending upon it, saying this is not real movie making.
Exactly. And honestly, this is more than movie making. This is universe building. So, like, Marvel, like, to round it off here, we've been talking forever, so I'll let you go. I don't want to,
Yeah,
talk your off all day, but basically, like, Marvel has done something truly special here, and it's transcendently good. And, yeah, like, I feel so proud to be, to have grown up a comic book nerd who was destined to be a virgin until I actually lost the baby weight. Like, but
yeah.
like, but to be able to grow up in this time where I like we've experienced firsthand the cultural impact of all these movies. It's a really, really special thing, and I hope people realize that this is a time where essentially we've witnessed the birth and the death, and the next chapter of one of the most important achievements in cinema that's probably ever been put in the film. Yeah, it's absolutely jaw dropping, and yeah, I'm just excited for what's to come. I don't know what's gonna happen. I don't know how it's gonna be in terms of quality or like expansiveness, but I'm just excited.
Yeah, let's just wait. Let's. I think it's gonna take too much energy to speculate on the
Hell
future.
no.
Let's just
Yeah,
wait until like Kevin Feige convenes all of the journalists in the world and says, "Hey, this is Phase 4. These are all the movies that are gonna come out. So let's just do a video at that time.
exactly. We'll do that. Yeah,
Until then, let's just leave it alone.
exactly.
Enjoy what we have and just leave it alone."
Exactly. All right. Any other closing thoughts before we leave people?
Well, I had a lot of fun doing this video. Had a lot of fun watching the movie. I'll probably see it a couple more times in the theater before it's all said and done. And hopefully, I'm really hopeful that it makes at least a run at Avatar's title of making 2.7 billion. I think it can get there.
I think it
And
definitely will. In terms of the opening weekend, this is the biggest one ever. Like,
yeah, it's almost halfway there. So I think a lot of their business is going to depend on people like you and I who are probably going to see the movie more than once. And then
exactly.
Avatar did have that 3D experience that you have to be in the theater to watch it. So multiple people were watching it. That's how you made so much money.
Yeah,
I feel like there's a whole experience thing in this movie as well that can drive those kind of numbers too.
exactly. But yeah, this is a absurdly important movie, and I loved it. So it's kind of interesting, man. Our friendship, started with Marvel movies in the lab, and then like once you graduated, we had this podcast where we talked about Infinity War, and now we've kind of come full circle. So
Oh yeah,
we got to find other shit to be fucking interested in. We can't be doing Marvel movies the rest of our
and
lives.
on the side, you've been growing as a. I'm interested to see where else you can take this whole thing. Like so far you stuck to movies, but had a lot of political discussions and
So,
stuff like that.
and so actually, we're gonna end it here, but I have an idea I want to talk to Abdallah about. So stay tuned for that.
All right, sounds good.
All right. With that, Lone Chemist Podcast, Johnny Abdallah.